Good evening and welcome to the Milton Planning Board. This is the 8th meeting of fiscal year 2021. And in accordance with the governor's orders, provisions of the open meeting law relating to the 2020 novel coronavirus outbreak emergency, this meeting of the Milton Planning Board is to be held remotely utilizing the Zoom virtual meeting software. The login and call-in information is included on the agenda, and the meeting is being televised live via Milton Access Television. My name is April Anderson. I'm the chair of the board. If the other members could please introduce themselves. Denny Swenson.
Denny Swenson, secretary and member.
Rich.
Rich Beeler, member.
Kathleen.
Kathleen O'Donnell, member.
Cheryl.
Cheryl Tagayas, member.
And our staff, Tim.
Tim Zawinski, Director of Planning and Community Development.
And Allison.
Allison Quinn, assistant planner.
And Julia. Julia's on mute.
Sorry, Julia Getman, clerk.
Thanks, Julia. Okay, so we have a few administrative items for this evening. Our next meeting is December 10th. That is a tricky week because we also have a special town meeting on December 2nd. The second meeting of the board would be scheduled the week of Christmas, and it is expected we will have one application before us on the 10th of December. But that is about it. So what I am going to propose is that we skip the second meeting of December and we meet December 10th and then we resume our regular schedule in January. Does anybody object to that?
I have a question. Do we need to do public hearing for zoning articles before January?
Tim, do you know what schedule is?
I do not. I know that the warrant closes next week. That's all that I've been informed of about the town meeting schedule.
So let's figure that out, but let's just stick with the plan to meet January 14th. And if we need to schedule something the first week in January, Tim can circle back with us.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay. And we have some minutes. Denny, would you like to?
Yes, I'd like to move to approve the meeting minutes for November 12th, 2020 without amendments.
Second.
Any discussion? If not, then we can take a roll call vote. Denny Swenson?
Yes.
Rich Beeler?
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell?
Yes.
Cheryl Tagayas?
Yes.
April Anderson, yes. Great. Okay, now we have the staff update. Tim?
So just a couple things that I want to just bring to the board's attention about some stuff that's been going on and stuff that we're doing. I wanted to lead off. I'm sure everyone is aware of the news, so it shouldn't be news to anyone. But we had a bicyclist. I don't want to use the term bicyclist. Someone was killed on our streets last week riding a bicycle on Blue Hills Parkway. Her name was Virginia Chalmers. She was an educator in the Boston Public School System, resident of Dorchester, bicyclist passing through Milton. As far as I know, that investigation is still going on. The state police are investigating. That's a DCR parkway, so that's state police jurisdiction. This is the second time since I've been working in town of Milton that we've had a pedestrian or a bicyclist killed on a DCR parkway. It's very upsetting, and that's it. It's upsetting. This is a topic that's really important to me. I think it's important to all of you. I think it's important to everyone in the town. The safety of our streets is something that I think needs to be at the forefront of the work that we do as a staff and as a board that's associated with planning in our town. So it's just, I wanted to take the time to just sort of make sure that everyone is sort of thinking about this and really approaching it with the sense of urgency that's necessary. I don't think it's acceptable for people who are just trying to get around to be put in mortal peril. And so I think planning obviously has a really big part of that. I was gonna I was gonna talk about this anyway, even if this terrible tragedy hadn't occurred. But we are going to be initiating a bicycle and pedestrian planning process. We're in discussions with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council to assist us with that. That'll get going next year. I think, again, the primary focus of that is going to be, safety of pedestrians and bicyclists, and, trying to figure out what we can do to our, infrastructure to make it safe for everyone that's trying to get around. I scheduled a meeting with the town administrator for next week to talk about the recommendations that are in the Traffic Mitigation Committee report. That was a report that came out earlier this year. It's a really good report. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It really does hit all of the most important notes about safety and about the cultural and mindset change that needs to occur in order for us to get out of our cars and move around in ways that are safer and more sustainable. So I think I hope to have more to report on this as the weeks and months go by. Obviously that bike and ped master plan process is going to be a big part of it, but also my work as a member of the Traffic Commission. The Traffic Mitigation Committee report really recommends a more proactive traffic commission. I hope to be a catalyst for that. So stay tuned for that. Just a couple more things. I have submitted a letter to the Select Board requesting nominations for members of an open space, open space and recreation plan committee. This is a step that's recommended by the Commonwealth for putting together open space plans. There will be, if the Select Board, votes to accept my recommendations, they'll be requesting a nomination from the Planning Board. So if you folks want to sort of start thinking about that, that'll be coming down the pike. And finally, just one thing that we've been working on is assisting the Board of Appeals as they prepare for opening up 40B public hearings for the Ice House project, the Blue Hill House project, and the Canton Ave project. I don't know if we talked about this in a meeting, but there has been a change in state law that, basically starting December 1st, the clock starts running and we need to open up those hearings. So we've been providing some assistance to the ZBA about that. There'll be, again, more news about the schedule of those hearings, to come, but we've been working very hard on that. Allison, I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to share.
Sure. So in the last couple of days, I did submit several applications to MHP for some technical assistance grants as the ZBA begins to review all of the 40B applications that will be in front of them in short order. I had a couple of great conversations with Katie Boss, who will be managing the grant applications for the town of Milton, and I'm hopeful to get some feedback from her very quickly. The applications will be submitted as soon as we get sign off from John Leonard and Melinda Collins. On top of that, we've continued to look at alternative opportunities to forward the housing production plan to put us in a position where we're having more control over the types of housing that Milton produces. And I've been bothering Kathleen with lots of Article 97 questions.
Okay.
Question on that, April.
Go ahead.
We had on the agenda in a prior meeting a discussion of the 40B applications that were actually filed with the Board of Appeal as being having been a little revised somewhat from what was originally filed with Mass Housing. And we talked about whether we should supply revised comment letters. So I did take a look at the revised architectural. I haven't studied every aspect of what they submitted, but there are changes. I do think it would be beneficial for the board to assist the Board of Appeal, in terms of the comments that we had before and update them.
I think we decided we would do that. We'll update our comments.
And I understand that the Board of Appeal is beginning the framework for starting these hearings the week of the 15th of December, that they will start, they will seat 3 different panels, if you will. Maybe Kathleen has a different word for them besides a panel. They'll be chaired by 3 different chairs, and they'll start on December 15th with the Parkway, on the 16th with Blue Hill Ave, and on the 17th with Canton Ave. And my understanding is they'll start in earnest then in January. So I would like for us to put that on the agenda in terms of discussion of those. The Parkway has been revised quite a bit from what was originally proposed in terms of the site plan, in terms of the massing, the architecture and everything. So if folks haven't seen that, it's definitely worth taking a look at.
Okay.
I did have a question for Tim.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Tim, how do we view the traffic mitigation report? Where is it on is it on the town website?
It is on the town website. I'll pull the link and I'll distribute it to the email list. It's relatively short. It's 36 pages, but it's good.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. The next on our agenda is Citizen Speak. We do have a couple of people who have dialed in. We do not have any public hearings tonight, so we won't be taking comment later in the meeting. So please raise your hand if you wish to address the board, and I will call you as you raise your hand. And Ellen Salone is the first. And you should be unmuted. Ellen, if you could just introduce yourself with your name and address and then address the board.
Ellen Anceloni, 22 Morton Road. Hi, everybody. So I'm here representing a client that is doing a project in Milton called Brenco Construction. They also developed 36 Central, which has been done, I think, 10 years ago. So they have recently purchased property over in East Milton, it's part of the 440 Granite Ave. It's on the corner of Granite and Mechanics, where the old bike infirmary used to be. So a cluster of buildings over there. So we've had a number of meetings. We had 2 meetings with the direct neighbors. We've had reach outs to the Chamber of Commerce and different people in East Milton. And we're looking to you guys for next steps. We did have I did have an early conversation with Tim and his group, and we're trying to make progress in this project. And we're just looking to you guys for a little bit of guidance on how to do that. And we're hoping that maybe we could schedule an informational meeting with you at a future date. So the project, just a little bit background on the project. So it's approximately 40 units, mixed use. It's directly on the corner of Mechanics and Granite. It'll have indoor parking, some surface parking. And as I mentioned, we did have 2 meetings with the neighbors, and we will be having another one probably in a few weeks. So just wanting to know the process and, next steps that you would suggest for us.
So, I mean, Tim, I don't know if you have some feedback on this. I think that the appropriate thing to do is work through Tim and Allison on your project and, where you are on design, and get some feedback from them at a staff level, and they can help you figure out when is the best time to come to the full board. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, Ellen, thanks for coming. So Ellen and her team, we spoke a few months ago. Our recommendation was to go out, talk to your neighbors, which I'm very glad to hear that you've been doing. Ellen, I think also, are you scheduled to meet with the East Milton Neighborhood Association?
Yes,
Okay.
I don't know the exact date, but I know that's in the works, Tim.
So that's all very good. It's an interesting time to be proposing development in East Milton. We've got an ongoing community visioning process. it's a little bit of a tough situation, because I think the planning board, I don't want to speak for the board, but my assumption is that the board is going to be looking towards the results of that planning process as a kind of a guidebook for what they're going to be interested in considering in East Milton. So it's a little bit of, kind of, I appreciate the position that you're in, Ellen, and your team, because I think we don't want to get too far out ahead of that process, which is scheduled to close out towards the end of January. But also, obviously, if you're interested in doing a project, you want to be, making some progress and making some moves. So I think, meeting with the neighbors and kind of getting an idea for, what they are interested in and what they're comfortable with is a good step. I think that as sort of the next few weeks go by, we'll learn a little bit more about, what the East Milton Working Group has been discussing and proposing. But I do think, an informational meeting, just to sort of present some drawings and some ideas, is probably a fine next step if April and the board agree. Because I do think that, looking at things in a more concrete way, and kind of, using that information based on what we know from what's been going on with the working group and what's been going on with some other projects, will give you some good information.
So what I'm wondering is this, and I guess this is a question for you, Tim. So I'm assuming this is a project that does not comply with existing zoning if it's use in East Milton. I don't know exactly what the zoning is on that particular parcel, but it seems like it's not. Strict.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, Ellen, are you going to be asking the board to do some sort of zoning relief for you?
Yes, but I think first, April, we want to just come in and just get some feedback, introduce the project. Wouldn't take a lot of time, because so if you figure it's the end of November, to wait to the end of January, 8 weeks, that's a long time to wait to get some feedback. And we, our client has really wanted to move this forward just because of what's happening in the world. There is demand for housing in Milton, as we all know.
So I think, I would say we only have one meeting between now and January. That was scheduled. So, and I think that agenda is probably full on December 10th. So the soonest you'll probably get before us is first or second week of January. But I think we can definitely do an informal meeting. I think you should definitely stay in close touch with Tim if you have certain decision points that need to happen sooner rather than later. But I think January is probably the quickest we can probably get to it. And even if this came up a couple weeks ago, Ellen, or a month ago, we probably wouldn't have fit you in sooner because we've been jammed up with 40B work.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
And we've had marathon meetings till 11 o'clock at night or 10:30 at night. And I don't know that we would have fit you in. So I don't know if we've lost any time in the last month or two anyways, but let's figure it out for the first available slot on our agenda, which is probably that first January meeting.
And Ellen, it would be very helpful if you could send me the latest drawings and diagrams that you have. I don't think I've seen anything since that initial meeting. So it would just be very helpful for me to take a look at kind of where the proposal stands at this point.
I would just like to say that, while we have many developments being proposed without this kind of consultation, the 740Bs that we're looking at, I'd like us to be welcoming of developers and their teams who want to work with us before they actually file projects. And so I think it's something that the board's done before, like when Falcones originally were starting their work. And it's been a couple of years, or at least, if not more, that we've been talking about doing planning in East Milton, and it's taken us a very long time. And so I think there's only so much patience that property owners can expect. We can expect property owners to have. So I support having a preliminary meeting and giving some guidance and trying to help figure out a way, if the project looks reasonable, not to have obstacles for things for people to work with us.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, but I also think people need to rely on the staff. So we're not always going to be able to fit people on immediately. I definitely think we should entertain discussions with developers who would like to do a pre-filing meeting, but traditionally that wouldn't happen before the board.
Well, April, we did talk to Tim and Allison, and they said wait till after the East Milton planning is done, and that doesn't seem reasonable to me. And I don't.
I would agree with that, because seriously, the way that's been going has been painful.
Yeah.
So,
No, I mean, I think I don't think we need to wait for a report to be final. I don't think we need to wait for any sort of outcome of that process. I think in the spirit of making sure that things are aligned, is probably where that comment came from. And I don't, in a perfect world, that would be great. But given the early feedback, I don't know that there's even going to be consensus of that East Milton group. Maybe there will be, maybe there won't be. I definitely think we should get you on the next available slot. And I don't want to create the impression that I'm trying to create an obstacle, because that's not it at all. I just want to make sure that we're setting up a system where the pre-filing meetings happen with the team. It seems like this is even a pre-filing meeting, since you don't comply with zoning, so you can't file anything yet. So let's fit you in on the next agenda.
I also want to support our chair and our staff in using their best judgment. And I also want to be careful to not put people on the agenda before the staff has all of the information that they've requested, because we have spent a lot of meetings here past 11 o'clock at night with applicants who said they would have their materials ready by the time of the meeting, and then they don't have their materials ready by the time of the meeting. And we end up entertaining them for many more meetings than we should have to, because the ducks aren't in a row. And I'm not suggesting, Ms. Anzalone, that that's what would happen for you at all, but I think we are trying to improve our systems behind the scenes. And I want to put more trust in stock in our staff. So I just wanted to support our chair in her efforts in doing that. And thank you to our staff for helping us on that path.
And Ellen, I just want to, I had requested your materials back in September and never got them. So if I could just get, like I said, the most recent updates, so I can take a look and give you that feedback that you're looking for.
Yeah,
that would be great.
We'll send it to you, Tim. We didn't want to make it public before we talked to the neighbors. We still thought they were very important to come to with some visuals before they hit the street. And I do, and this may irritate everybody, but I think you canceled the other meeting in December, so now we get pushed to January. These guys are developers, and you know how they work. We're trying to get product in Milton. And if Milton wants to be a developer-friendly community and have this level of developer who really cares about the town, it seems a little unreasonable.
Two comments.
You need a zoning change, so it's not like you can get a shovel in the ground tomorrow.
No, I know, but April, we just want some feedback from you guys.
Understood.
Sorry, two comments. So just, well, actually, I'm going to start with this one, just because it's just something I've been thinking about for a bunch of meetings. Is there any way, and you don't have to answer this now, this might be James answers this, but I know that attendees can raise hands. And I know that if we were in meetings in person, we would all be raising hands, before we jump in. And it's really hard, to me. I don't want to step on anybody, but I feel like you got to jump in when there's a lull, and it's really hard to make comments. So if you guys can think about that for maybe next meeting, because this is hard for me to not feel like I'm jumping on somebody, but still wanting to talk. And I feel like sometimes it just goes off, Anyway, the comment I want to make, I agree, Denny, would echo everything you just said. And I think, I don't know, Tim, it might have been you or April that mentioned at the beginning, just to reiterate it, because it will come up in your first meeting. And obviously this is the first time I'm hearing about this project. So, I don't, it sounds like there's some issue with wanting to get in quick, but I get it. But, I'm just hearing about it now. And so I'm looking forward to hearing about the project. But I would stress what was mentioned at the beginning. I would talk to the neighborhood associations, because one of the first things somebody's going to ask you when you do come in is, so what did the neighborhood say? And have you talked to folks? And that's just going to cause you more delays and more meetings if you don't have answers to those things?
We've been trying to get a meeting with the neighborhood association, the East Milton group. That is now on the books. We met with the abutters on Mechanic Street twice. And there's been a fair amount of reach out to the merchants in town in East Milton, and any of the other business owners in local residents. So we have been doing a fair amount of legwork. So I'm surprised, Richard, you haven't heard of this, but it's been happening for the last few months.
I think my comment was this is the first time we've talked about it as a board.
Okay.
Like I don't know.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, we will get you set up on the agenda and Tim will follow up. And if you could send him some material so we know what we're looking at, that would be terrific.
All right, will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else for citizen speak? I don't see any other hands raised. Oh, a lot of talk. I'm unmuting a person by the name of Kristen. If you could please introduce yourself with your name and address. And then the floor.
My name is Kristen with Cambridge Port Construction. Following up on 25 and 30 Marine Road, we've got a cluster development that we are looking to develop and looking to change some of the grading now that we have finalized house plans.
Kristen, if I could just interrupt you for 1 minute, that's the next item on our agenda. So what we, I think it is, yeah, 245 Highland Street. So what we just finish up with the citizen speak and then Tim can introduce this. And if he needs some feedback from you, we can go from there. Does that work?
Great.
Okay,
Perfect.
Thank you. Anyone else for citizen speak? No. Okay, then we will move on to the next item on our agenda is new business for 245 Highland Street. I would just like to make a note. This is our first and I think only permitted cluster development in Milton. Part of the cluster development bylaw allows for the creation of an affordable lot or payment in lieu of that lot to the town's affordable trust. This is the first time that the planning board had ever exacted payment for something like that. And the project was making a $50,000 contribution to the town's affordable housing trust. The project has moved forward. The only people on the board at the time of this approval were Cheryl and I. And Tim's going to talk to us about what I think is a technical issue, I hope. And then we can move on to the next part of our discussion. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so as Kristen said earlier, there are two building permit applications for 25 and 30 Marine Road, which is the road that was created by this cluster approval. And typically, whenever a building permit application comes in for any kind of either subdivision or special permit project, I get a note from the building commissioner asking for the planning department sign off. The reason being, these special permits and approvals often have some type of requirement in them that's pegged to either a building permit being issued or an occupancy permit being issued. And so I got an email from the building commissioner saying that there were these two building permits coming in. And so in reviewing the special permit, in section 3, labeled the cluster development plan, there is a paragraph that says the cluster development shall be constructed in all respects as shown on the cluster development plan, including the notations thereon and as specified herein. All buildings, utilities, sewer, drainage, other infrastructure, roadways, walkways, earth moving, and the features of the open land shall be constructed and maintained as shown in the cluster development plan. No construction shall deviate without the approval of the planning board. And so I'll highlight that earth moving section of that paragraph. And if you look at the cluster development plan that was approved, there's very little grading that's shown on the approved plan. And so when these building permit applications came in and showed any amount of regrading, quite frankly, that just was a flag for me that, this is something that the board needs to give their thumbs up to. And so I have put in the folder, the final special permit, and then the in a folder called 2021 grading changes. There is two plan sets, one for 25, one for 30, and then two letters from the proponent's engineer explaining the rationale for the grading. So I think with that, I think if April, if you'll allow Kristen and her team to take over.
Yep. Kristen, you should be unmuted now. Okay,
Thank
go ahead.
you. Yeah, so I'd just like to kind of
Sorry to
reiterate.
Here, we had one moment for the citizens to speak, so I didn't want to jump ahead of that. So thank you.
No worries. Yeah, so I'd just like to kind of reiterate the letter that we've changed the grade slightly from the cluster development plan as a result of dealing with a high water table on both of these properties. So we've had to bring the buildings up slightly and just regrade around them to accommodate. And I wanted to also point out that it doesn't change the overall grading of the development. We're still mitigating the water on site as we would with the whole development in mind. We also have Molly here with Stamsky and McNeary if you guys have specific questions for the engineers.
I have comments that could potentially be questions.
Sure.
If we could pull the plan up.
Which one do you want first, Cheryl?
The one that was the approved plan.
Okay.
So while you're doing that, I'll just, this came in as a cluster development, and what the cluster development seeks to accomplish is to cluster the lots together so that what normally might be spread out equally amongst the lots, you're preserving open space and then you're making smaller lots for the individual homes. And the discussion at the time, and particularly with neighbors who lived there, was that they valued that open space and they valued the wildlife that occupied some of that open space. And so that was a big part of support for this subdivision, was the fact that we'd have this open space buffer around the perimeter. And how the drainage was going to be done and trees that were going to be preserved was a part of that. And as we know from so much experience now, that regrading impacts those existing trees. And I'm concerned about the potential impact on the existing trees in the buffer zones in that open space, particularly because that was the whole point of the cluster development, was to preserve that. So I want to, when we get the plan up, I want to point out a couple of things. And one of the things that I noticed in the plan for Lot 1 in particular is that it's a pad that's been created, not just for the house, but for a backyard lawn. And it pushes a lot of fill close to that open space. And that concerns me in terms of the roots for the trees that are in that open space. And so, you able to find that, Tim?
So I don't have the plan in the folder, so I'm trying to bring up the website and see if we have it posted up there. So just give me just another half a minute.
Okay. And then with Lot 4, what I'm concerned about is the way the house is positioned on the lot necessitates retaining walls at the property lines. And that's another thing that was not contemplated at all in the original subdivision plan. There were no retaining walls shown at lot lines. And again, here it's I don't think this impacts the buffer zone where those retaining walls are, but I also it's bringing in fill, and maybe the engineers can talk about whether there's a cut fill balance here. But in my sense is that there's fill being brought in, and it's not a balanced situation. So that plan there, Tim. So if you zoom in, like this plan doesn't actually have it does have the lots numbered, I think, but the Lot 1 is kind of hard to read, but at the top there. And And you can see that there are trees that are circled and it's called out for trees to be preserved. So the drainage structure went to the right of this lot, and you can see where there's kind of a, kind of a curvy line. And that curvy line is called out as the tree line, I believe. And then there's trees called out to be protected, sort of in the middle of what we see here, tree to be protected, typical, and there's circles around it. And there are trees on this lot that are circled, and there are trees right next to the property line that are part of that protected zone. I'm concerned about the fill impact of those trees. So Tim, if you could now go to the proposed lot 1 grading plan. So you can see here, we're rising up 5 feet or 6 feet, the new contour of the 170 line at the top, and then pulling up to 176. So I guess what I'd ask for is from the engineers, if they've looked at where the existing trees that were to be protected are, what their canopy is, and therefore where their root structure is, and then how much fill is being proposed to be put on top of that root structure. And if that grading plan can be revised so as to not have an impact on trees. It's hard to tell here because the trees aren't shown. But from that prior plan, it seems to me that there are trees that would be impacted by this grading plan. My sense is that even with a higher water table and setting the floor elevations where you are, you don't have to push out the grades to form to the property lines like they are shown here. Those could be pulled back in away from the property line, still keep your floor elevations where they're being set.
What I'm curious about is how come nobody knew this when you first did the cluster, that the water table was high or higher? I mean, it seems kind of amazing to me that you come in 3 years later to say, oh no, we can't have this work the way it was approved.
I personally can't speak to that. I'd like to pass that one off. Jim Burke, are you on?
I am. So when the cluster property was approved, there was no test pits of the property. The first 2 houses on the property were after the test pits were done. We discovered the clay at 3 feet. And those were both approved, as Tim and I have talked about. And they have had no issues with drainage and no issues with construction. And we simply want the next 2 houses to be kept to the same standard. We want to protect trees and protect the overall drainage of the subdevelopment in the property. But the simple fact is there is clay at 3-4 feet here. And if we put the basements in that clay, they will flood. And nobody expected this property at the top of the hill to have a high water table, but it in fact does.
Jim, you, I think would agree what I said was that if you kept the floor elevations where they're set, you could still revise that grading to pull those grades back.
That I would have to go back to Cheryl, let me, just to make sure we're on the same page. The floor elevations where they're set on the original plan is what you're asking?
No, where do you have them here as you propose?
Oh, and then set the grades to keep those trees.
That's right, because I think you would agree that you don't have to do the grading in this sort of rectangular fashion following the property lines that way. You could pull that all in closer to the house so that you're not putting as much fill on the trees, right?
And we're talking about lot 1, obviously, in this particular case. Yeah.
Yes.
So that would involve probably some low retaining walls on that property or some sort of grading. Yeah, I think it's possible. I want to check with engineers to make sure, but let's take a look.
I did drive by again today just to make sure that what was on those plans and the trees that we're looking at is somewhat what's there. And there are a lot of trees
I
there.
mean,
and I don't
I'll
know-
be honest, and I'm happy to meet you guys out there, but most of those trees are dead, just by their own nature. I go to this property all the time, they're dead.
Well, one of my
We're happy to try to save
frustrations.
them, and I don't want to kill a tree any more than anybody else does. But
One of my frustrations of having been on the board, now this is my 6th year, is that we
Sure.
spend a lot of time reviewing plans and being very careful about protecting where we think we're going to protect trees and how we think that these plans, as proposed to us, for a cluster and having these buffer zones and open
course.
space requirements. And then if they're disregarded during construction, it's really wasteful.
no, and we're
From our point
not,
of
we
view.
haven't, 100%. We have not built on this lot, and we haven't started to, and we won't, and that's why we're here, because we want permission to build on this lot.
Right.
And we want permission. We want to do what's right, and just we're interested in saving those trees. I just don't know if all the trees on the plan truly exist as live trees anymore. And
Well, I
I'm
think,
happy to save any tree that there is. I just don't know that that's a true, but that plan, as you said, 3 years ago was made is a true reflection of what's going on the site
Well,
today.
part of the
Well,
reason the
shouldn't you be
trees
showing
die
us-
is,
Shouldn't you
sorry.
be showing us now where they are? I mean, where the trees are in relation to what you're doing with this grading? I mean, if it's 3 years and you're saying half these trees are dead, I mean, wouldn't we want to see a plan with the new grading that shows what trees are
Sure,
being
we
affected?
can certainly do that. So the tree, if you look at, so I am not, so the tree, I'm not sure of the nomenclature, but looking at the screen I'm looking at now, the tree on lot 1 in the bottom left corner, it says tree to be protected typical, and I assume that denotes a deciduous, not an evergreen, and the other symbol denotes an evergreen. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yeah,
The
if
other
there's a
circle
legend
trees?
there.
I'm gonna need to go to the key to see that. So if everyone
If
has,
you don't mind, so I'm on the same page.
I guess what I would say too, while he's doing that, is that
Sure.
oftentimes the trees die during or as a result of construction activities.
Sure.
And that doesn't, that's not a good thing. It's a thing we try not to have happen. And so,
we're not interested in that either. Absolutely not.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, so yeah, coniferous and deciduous. I was correct. Yep. Okay.
I did want to add to what Cheryl was saying. I did a quick Google Earth map, and I do see some really beautiful old trees. I don't know how old this Google Earth map is, but
Yeah.
I would be concerned to find that all of those trees were dead, or the trees around the edges of where you want to build, because they provide a buffer for the other neighbors and so forth. So I do think that Cheryl is onto something in her efforts to protect them.
I totally agree. We should protect those trees. So I guess 2 things is, one, we would like to protect the trees, and we are certainly happy to do what we need to do to protect them, as long as we can build the house, that it isn't prone to flooding because it's in the higher water table. So whichever compromise we can come to or agreement we come to do that, we are open to that, certainly.
may I suggest that you go back and take a look at this plan and see which of these trees are impacted by your plan, and come back to us with back to Tim with a revised grading plan that locates these trees and maybe calls out their sizes, which ones you deem to be dead, which ones you can protect, and which ones you think you can't protect and would like permission to remove.
Okay.
And we can put that on the December 10th agenda.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely want to do that. I didn't realize honestly, and this is different from what we're allowed to do to what we want to do, that we need permission to remove the trees, but certainly we can do that.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
And for all of you, I guess, is that when this cluster plan was approved, you're showing an arbitrary footprint on the plan and it didn't require a bunch of grading and all that sort of stuff. The new house that you're putting on this lot looks to be significantly larger than what was that arbitrary footprint building. So I guess I have a question back to you folks who approved this cluster plan. Is there some limitation on what these folks were supposed to be building in terms of the house size and stuff? Because this is a lot larger than looked like what was on the plan that you approved.
I mean, we permitted the lots, not the sites. And it is in our folder here. We can open it and take a look.
I'll look at the decision, but it's part of the problem. It seems to me is that, like, going back to Cheryl's point about what's being taken down, and retaining walls, and all those sorts of issues, is that when you looked at the cluster that you approved, the footprints of the houses wasn't anything is the size that this is being proposed here.
I don't see any restriction on the house size in our permit.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm just asking the question because it seems to me that, you wouldn't have had this problem if you weren't trying to build something that's twice the size of what you were looking at.
Yeah, but we have to be careful about this, Kathleen, because this is a permitted project, and we permitted.
No, I'm just asking. I just asking.
I know, but I just want to make. I just want to make sure for the board. I mean, we're not re-permitting this project. We're deciding whether or not this grading makes sense. And I think the questions are around how it impacts the trees. We can't talk about the size of the house because we permitted these as lots with no restriction on the house size. So, I mean, they can either make the grading work with an impact that's minimal, that's that the board is comfortable with, or they can't. But I don't want to get into a whole new discussion about whether or not we should have been talking about the house size.
No, I'm just saying that you wouldn't have the grading problem if you weren't trying to build something that is.
It's a good point for next time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the expectation was that
or you had
the zoning for the district would apply, in terms of setbacks and so forth. I mean, the reality is actually that our zoning for single families doesn't have a very restrictive floor area requirement. I mean, you're allowed to build pretty big and pretty close to property lines, and it's something that we could look at, I suppose. I agree. It's something each one of these we approve, we learn something, right, about what we might want to do in our next one. But I do think on the grading that it is possible to have this house built where it's located at the floor elevations that are necessary, not to be in the water table and to protect trees. I think the engineer just needs to go back and take a look at a new plan. That's all.
Yep.
And I think on lot 4, if we could go to that, I just have some questions about why the house is positioned the way it is, because I think that's what's driving the retaining walls. This isn't this is a little out of context. I mean, I'm sorry, can you go back to the one we were just looking at to show lot 4 in context of the others, just so everybody can picture what's around it? So it does buffer, it does abut the buffer zone, but there are less trees in that zone to the right. But it does have this sort of access kind of funny shape you see coming in from the left side there. And I think so now, I think if you could go back, Tim, to the proposed plan. And if you could just zoom in a little bit on where that access comes in, because that's where the grading and the retaining walls are. So you see there, like that, the circles, again, the ovals, the proposed retaining wall, and then down a little bit further, Tim, on the property line where it says proposed driveway and other. Now, could you just zoom back out a little bit further again? And the way this is positioned so close to that juncture of the narrow access, and at the angle that it is, it's not parallel to the street nor parallel to the lot lines. And it's driving that driveway very close to the property line to the left. And I'm wondering why it's done that way, because it seems to me if it's rotated, it gives you more room. And And if you move it down some, that you may not need so much in the way of retaining walls. And so that was my question for you, really.
Sure. So the reason, two things. Obviously, it's tight with the setbacks, given the cluster restrictions. So two things. One, the plan, so it's not shown on this, but the ridge line would be right to left over the main house, not over the garage. And the plan is for that south elevation of the roof to have solar. So any rotation off of this, if you look at the compass, it's dead south, and that's for a reason, so they can get maximum solar efficiency. And two, we did 3 different studies to move the house to the south, away from the north neighbor, and none of them worked well. If every foot we move south, we get closer on the west to the property line, and it just wasn't worth it.
What's the space that's the body of the house being the rectangle there, and then on the right there's something that's jogging out?
That's just a deck or a screen and porch. That's not an inside space.
So if that were moved to the south, you would have more flexibility, right, in terms of how it's positioned on the property?
Perhaps that would have to be up to the homeowner and the engineer and the architect, but the goal was to orient the house to the south for maximum solar. And
the other thought I had is to move the garage towards the right, leaving the link where it is, perhaps, and giving yourself a little more room to position the house further down. Again, making a pad there, so you're, where the 181 and contour is, and then you're bringing in the 182 and 183 and 184, and you're using retaining walls to build the pad. Again, the sort of the idea of this beautiful property when it came to us was that, we can build houses on this property and preserve what's around it. And the more we do this kind of stuff, it's like, to me, I call it kind of an aggressive approach to the land. It's not using the land, and sort of letting the land speak to you about what is an appropriate way to build there.
I don't disagree with that. And just unfortunately, once we started to, and I built the first house on the property and somebody else built the second, not me. But once we started to dig into the land, we found it didn't cooperate, and that it had just a layer of clay at 3 or 4 feet, which we just couldn't put people's basements in a place where it was clearly going to flood. I think we've done well with the first 2 houses, me and another builder, another architect, another design team completely. I think these houses will go with those. I think it won't be any different than Fletcher Steel Road right up the street, which have been raised many, many more feet above the road than these will be. I'm looking at a couple young families who want to build their houses here and have had these permits in for 7-8 weeks and just have now been told that they may have to wait till next year. And I understand your concerns 100%. I just, in my own personal opinion, I don't think any of this, in my opinion, minor raising of grade is going to fundamentally change the character of this new neighborhood, this new street. It's just my opinion, and then, that's what I have to say about it.
Okay. Well, the first, at least in lot 1, we have the tree concerns. Here, you're concerned about a retaining wall. Why don't you go back and see if there's any modifications you can make? We'll put you on the December 10th agenda.
Okay.
We can resolve it then.
If so, is that, because that means, and that's fine if that's what we have, that means both of these projects are de facto done till the spring. And And I just have to say, you know, we submitted for these 2 months ago, and we only heard about this. The first two houses were built with these grading changes without objection from the planning board, without a hearing. They were approved by the building department, by the planning board, and we expected the same approval and the same treatment for those two homeowners as these two. They bought these properties with the expectation they would get a building permit, and now they're being asked to lose 5 or 6 months because the rules were changed, and I need to adapt to that.
So, and this is, Tim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is because of the language about strict compliance in the permit?
It's the same permit.
Yes.
That's correct, April. I can't speak for the previous two houses. The rules have always been, since this document was signed on March 9th, 2017, that any deviation from the approved plan needed approval from the planning board. So, I mean,
Both
that's
of those
Let's
other
just be
houses
clear.
were built
The planning board,
after 2017.
the planning board was not apprised of any plans, and we didn't approve those prior plans. So I just want to be clear about that. There was no.
I completely understand that. I just would ask why these two homeowners are being punished where the previous two were not. Why is there a change in the criteria?
So I
Were
think
you deviating from your plans? Were you deviating from your plans for the first two houses, or were you?
They were built as submitted. We've talked to Joe Prondak about this. The previous planning director had no problem. He said, I understand you found clay. It doesn't affect the grading of the subdevelopment. Go for it. Now, these two homeowners who spent a lot of money in these lots are being treated differently. And we have two young families who are looking to build houses in Milton who are now told they have to lose many months because the rules have been changed on them. And if that's what it is, that's what it is. But I need to go back to them with an explanation.
Well, the
Mr.
rules
Burke-
haven't changed. We're just
Well, that's-
reading the permit.
I guess you're
No.
enforcing them now. I guess.
All right, so let me just jump in here. I understand your concerns completely, Jim, and I understand your frustration. The challenge is that our permit said strict compliance, and you were granted 2 permits without strict compliance the first 2 times. And our planning director now is doing his job, and I appreciate that. And unfortunately, it's causing a hang up for you. I personally thought this was going to be a very quick administrative approval.
So did I.
Board members do not think so. We just heard from another member resident during Citizen Speak complaining that we weren't friendly enough to business because we couldn't put them on the agenda for a concept plan immediately. That doesn't even comply with zoning. And you have a plan here that's been approved and permitted, and you just can't unlock it. So I understand the frustration. I mean, I'll leave it up to the board. Should we do something more accommodating to allow these people to get in the ground before the spring?
I think it's November 24th now. We're talking about December 10th. If we grant approval on December 10th with revised plans, I can't imagine that those 3 weeks cause a 5 or 6 month delay. I don't know about if the timing of this was critical to do before the winter, then I would think submitting before September would have been advisable. You can't, I think the expectation on the turnaround of permits, it's highly dependent upon how busy the building department is and what the schedule of the planning board is. So I guess, my sense is that the strict compliance is required. There are legitimate concerns. The way the special permit was reviewed and drafted, and it's based upon a set of plans. And I recognize that you find this frustrating, but I find it frustrating when our plans are not followed. And we have had it come up later that things aren't followed. So I just think it's important.
I don't disagree, but I would say, the first 2 built houses were approved. I find it frustrating these 2 people who bought the lots don't get treated the same way.
So I think,
And-
I mean, I just want to interrupt you for a minute because we do have to get on to some
Of
other.
course.
I hear where you're coming from. I hear where Cheryl's coming from. I do think it's unfair to the applicant. They didn't expect to have to go through this process because they didn't have to the last 2 times. And that's, you know, they applied for their construction permit and they got it. So it's not, you know, it's unfortunate. Nobody's doing anything wrong here. We're trying to follow the permit. Unfortunately, the first time it didn't get caught and the houses are developed and they look lovely, by the way. Your work has been great there. Hopefully we can get this moving. I think we need to, for everybody's benefit, push this to December 10th. Hopefully we can get it resolved quickly. Hopefully
Well,
we can come back with, especially the tree preservation is something that's very important to this board. And whatever you can do on lot 4 and we can address it then.
I absolutely would also like to
Apologies.
say that December 10th could conceivably delay us for many, many months, because if the ground freezes in the next 3 weeks, then we're done until the spring, and that's where what we're fighting against. And we did submit in September, and now it's almost December, and that's a lot longer than we would expect a response. So I appreciate all your time. I obviously disagree with the decision here, and we'll do what we can, but I believe we've delayed us till the spring.
Okay, well, I apologize for that. And we should probably move on unless anybody else has anything to say.
I appreciate it. Thank you
Thank
all
you.
for your time.
Thank you.
Anything else on this? No. Okay, the next item on our agenda is 2020 zoning articles. We have Jenny Swenson's tree bylaw. We have condo conversion, which we've actually already approved, but have some new feedback on. And we have the draft ADU bylaw. Why don't we start, Tim, do you have the comments from the building commissioner on the condo conversion?
I can bring those up in a minute.
Okay. Denny, are you ready? You want to just go first on the trees?
Oh, sure. So it's about the grade and fill bylaw. Cheryl and I and Tim met with Joe Prondak. I think it was Zoom. Was it Zoom? It was Zoom. And we had a very nice meeting. He seemed to be fine with the tree changes that we all seem to be fine with. But he wanted to go over some further engineering, ease of use improvements, but he needed the engineer to weigh in. And our new engineer followed our old engineer and went to Braintree. So we lost a second very nice engineer. But the good news is, I think a new one has started recently, Tim, is that true?
Monday.
Okay, just started. So
Yeah, next Monday, sorry.
Next Monday hasn't even
We have a
arrived.
new environmental coordinator that started this past Monday. So
Oh, lots of things
really
happen on Mondays.
filling out the staff down the hall.
Well, so this new engineer has not had a chance to look at our bylaw, and I think that's probably going to be low on his priority or her priority for a while. So in the meantime, I thought we could move forward with the tree updates to the grade and fill bylaw for the February town meeting because they are in good shape according to our last meeting. And I'm hoping that this will allow our working group of Cheryl, Tim, Joe Prondak, and I, and the new town engineer, when he or she has time, to really sink our teeth into the engineering goals of improvement. And, you know, we could aim for May town meeting or fall town meeting. And I thought when we stand before town meeting in February, we can explain that we plan to come back with further engineering, you know, ease of use improvements to the bylaw at a future meeting. But in the meantime, we would like to add this tree language. I think the last discussion we had moments ago about the tree language is an example of why we want to get this tree language in, so that the rules of the road are out there for the public and the applicants to all see, because when they arrive to our planning board or zoning board or other boards, we want them to understand that we are a tree-friendly town and we want trees to be considered at every stage of construction. So that's my proposal, and I'm interested to hear what others think. I'm basically trying to solidify progress where we can,
Right.
because we have so many balls in the air. Oh,
Yeah.
good.
I mean, if we have to wait for, the complete change of the whole engineering thing, that'll be another year. In the meantime, we've got situations that we've had, in the last 2 meetings where we've talked about saving trees and all that sort of stuff. So I'm prepared to go ahead with this.
Okay, thank you. Anyone
So,
else?
There's a
I'm-
comment that says guest user. I'm trying to figure out whose comment that is.
I think that was mine from before
okay.
that got incorporated. I just want
Yes,
to
that
say,
did get incorporated.
thank you, Denny. And Denny did a good summary. I have been doing a little bit of research myself on what other towns have for cut and fill and site planning. And I sent some information along to Denny and to Tim and to Joe about that so that we can think about it kind of comprehensively, because the town of Franklin has an interesting, they call it a guidebook. I forget the exact title, but a development guidebook, and it incorporates low impact design. So that's from a stormwater point of view, but and also from an environmental point of view. So getting to sort of habitat, trees, and things that I've talked about a lot, which, as I said tonight, sort of an aggressive behavior or more sympathetic kind of approach to planning on our properties. And so I'm hoping that we can work together with the new town engineer to come up with something. Some of that is definitely in the engineering focus, but parts of that are really planning focused. And Tim and I had a brief conversation about that, and think that there's some good material in some of what I was able to locate. So I look forward to moving forward with that. But in the meantime, I'm happy to support moving forward with this.
So one quick thing, this material is presented in a way that makes sense for understanding it. It's not necessarily put together in warrant form. So I guess, should I take a crack at sort of putting together some type of language that says add trees here and add section 7 here, or
I think
how do we want to approach that?
Why don't you send that to Kevin Freitag and have him do it?
Yeah, it doesn't usually, when I was town council, we did that. That was our job.
Okay. All right. I don't know. I hope that he can get that done by next Wednesday, I guess, is what I'm.
I think that if you're willing, Tim, if you're willing to take a shot at it, I think.
Or Tim, if you want me to ask Alex Whiteside, he might be able to help me.
We don't need to bug Alex over the long Thanksgiving weekend.
Tim, I can probably assist you with that if you would require some assistance. I'm happy to try and take us down.
Let me take a look at it tomorrow. I just want to make sure that the select board has something in their hands on Wednesday that is a reasonable approximation of what's going to look like the warrant. I just, with the long weekend coming up, I don't think that town council will be able to turn that around in time. But if it's looking desperate, I'll talk to the front office about it. So I just want to.
Another alternative might be for you and Allison to just take a crack at it and send this document with your draft language to him to review. I mean, this doesn't look like it's super complicated.
Yeah.
In many ways to review. I mean, the intention is very clear. So that sounds good. Rich, did you have anything to add?
No.
Okay.
I think Denny has her hand up.
Yeah,
I'm
I just
sorry.
wanted to alert Tim. This isn't the most finalized version. There was one version after this. I emailed it to you right after the meeting where I added Cheryl's change, and I think there might have been a couple of other changes in that meeting. I can check my email box, the sent, and resend it to you. Is that a good idea?
Could you please do that? That would be great. Thank you.
That. Yep. So check your email box before you tackle this.
So it seems to me that it's the board's comments that we are happy with this draft and perhaps an amended draft that Denny's going to share with Tim, and that we're prepared to move forward with this as a zoning change for the February town meeting. And then we will continue to work towards a cut and fill zoning change to happen hopefully in May or shortly thereafter under Cheryl's direction. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then let's make a motion to advance this. Somebody want to make a motion to advance draft
So moved.
bylaw? Well, how do we word this? Title of
Oh yeah, what is the title?
okay. Earth materials removal and deposit of fill.
There it is. Yes, section 4A, earth materials removal and deposit of fill, zoning bylaw. I move to move it forward to town warrant,
To the Board of Selectmen for
to the Board of Selectmen for the town warrant for February 2021 town meeting.
any second.
Second.
Okay. Not then let's do a roll call vote. Jenny Swenson,
Yes.
Rich Beeler,
Yeah.
Cheryl Tagayas,
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell,
Yes.
April Anderson, yes. Yay. Okay.
Yay.
The next item I think we should probably go to is condo conversion. There were 4 comments. I don't know if you've seen them, Tim, or if you found them, but from the, I believe we already voted to advance this to the select board. However, there were 4 comments from the building commissioner that seemed worthy of conversation since we had this extra meeting to discuss. And I don't know if, oh, there they are. So Kathleen, did you have a chance to look at these?
Yes, yeah, I did. The first one, what's the purpose of restricting the entry to 6 units, was a suggestion from Cheryl to avoid having a long facade with, not proper breakup. So it was sort of a design feature that Cheryl had suggested. I did make some changes to the bylaw after seeing these comments. And in number 9, we had made that change. In number 6, let me see, number 10, what if the existing structure doesn't comply with the setbacks? They're going to have to go into the zoning board. I mean, we don't have the ability to override that. And I think I fixed the 10 and 11. I fixed it was a typo thing that I took care of.
So were these issues addressed before we voted the last time?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't need to do anything on condo conversion. Okay, then we're good to go.
Can we just really quick go? So I have up on the screen right now the language that was approved at the meeting on the 13th.
Mm-hmm.
But we had fixed it after that. Remember, we had said that, we were fixing it, and I sent you we had voted it with the corrections that we were making.
Yeah, we did.
Make sure you got the right one.
Because Tim made corrections at the meeting, but Kathleen followed up with some other language that couldn't be done so readily at the meeting. Yeah.
Right.
I also would like, just while Tim's pulling that up, I would like to talk about the list that Tim prepared and made us aware of today, just in terms of how many properties. Because I do think that's important. And I don't know if you wanted to speak to Alex Whiteside's comments, April. But
I just wanted to make reference that we received actually 2 sets of comments, one from Alex Whiteside, one from resident Janet Irwin with concerns about the bylaw and the timing. And whether this should happen now or not happen now. Personally, I think those should be discussed at our hearing. I think we've.
Okay, I don't think I received the second one, so.
Neither did I.
Okay, so maybe they just came to me. They came in through, I think, the website, but we will make sure they're circulated for everybody. I mean, honestly, I think we've already voted this. I think the board has discussed it ad nauseum, the need for it or our intention with it. And I think that we
I
can
think so
discuss.
too.
Well, I guess one thing that I'd like to maybe think about a little bit is, you know, how we did do some outreach. We had the public hearing, but we also did some other outreach on the Milton Village, which I think was helpful for town meeting members. So I wanted to, hopefully that we could talk about how we might do something similar to kind of make sure people understand what we're trying to do.
Yes, and Tim actually brought that up with me, I think last week or the week before, I don't know, about doing that. And I agree. I think we should definitely do something, especially with the Zoom format. It's a little bit harder for, you know, people to follow along, and everybody's busy with the pandemic. So I think anything that we can do, a webinar or something of that sort, as you did with Milton Village, would be really helpful. I think it would also be helpful to do something maybe even a little more broadly about, I don't know if it's all of the articles or the housing articles that we've been discussing and how that fits in with the housing production plan and why these things are important and how we are doing planning around housing, because we've gotten that criticism so often that all these 40Bs are coming because we're not doing our job. And I think it would be helpful for us to help people understand that that's not true. So yes.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think maybe we can work on something, and I don't know if this should be Tim and I work on something offline, or Allison and Tim or whoever, but to talk about at the December 10th meeting, pulling something together for public outreach.
So if I can just quickly fill you in, which I probably should have done earlier, my apologies. I've been working with Danya from the Select Board Housing Committee to put together some kind of webinar that will demonstrate how the housing production plan, in conjunction with changes to our zoning, is the path to the 10%. And we've just started creating the framework for that. And we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow between 1 and 2. But I think the more collaboration on it would be fantastic, because I think that the planning board perspective offers a lot in that conversation. So if you want me to send you the invite tomorrow, April, Tim, whoever wants to come, that's fantastic.
Yeah, maybe we can do something in conjunction with that. I think Charles' point, though, about doing something so that we're preparing town meeting members in advance of February is a point well taken, and we definitely need to do it.
So just real quick, my first instinct is always that I screwed something up, but a lot of times I haven't, which is good. So the version that's in the folder is in fact the version with the corrections that Kathleen sent after the last meeting. I just kind of cleaned it up a little bit and changed the font color. So we should be all set.
Okay, thank you.
So that's already voted. Yes, thank you. And thank you for being so attentive to detail, Tim. It's important. So I think we can move on then to the accessory dwelling unit draft bylaw.
I'm sorry, April. I wanted if we could to look at that list of properties.
Oh, yes, we can do that. Yep.
Okay.
Danny, did you have something else too?
Yeah, Cheryl can go first.
Okay. And this, just for the public's benefit, is some work that Tim had done to identify the eligible parcels, or potentially the universe of parcels that would be eligible for this condo conversion bylaw.
I think, Tim, you had said tab 3, right, was the one that we could focus on. And
yeah, just so everyone's clear, there are kind of three kind of gating issues in the zoning. So currently the draft that was approved, it's eligible for all houses built 1930 or earlier. You have to have at least 4,000 square feet in an existing building, and you'd have to have a lot that has at least 10,000 square feet in order to do 3 units. So that's what tab 3 is. That's all these. Sorry, Cheryl.
Oh, no, thank you. That's important. And can you just scroll down to the bottom, because I think this put it at more than we were thinking at our last meeting. And I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that, because we did talk about maybe, I think it was 150-ish, and this is at 236. And so some of these, if we look at this, how many would you say, Tim, are like less than a half acre? If we're looking at the fact that maybe
A lot of them.
yeah. So if even the ones that are, how about less than because my sense is once we apply some of the other controls to it, that that those may in fact allow just for conversion of an existing large dwelling and nothing else.
It looks like there's 33 under a half acre.
Yeah. So it looks like at that 152, like 156, I think is kind of where we were thinking probably last time, and we were probably around an acre is what we had been thinking, right? So I just wanted to see if anybody had any concerns about the additional quantities here, because I know, Denny, you asked about that at our last meeting, and I just wanted to see what anybody thought about these sort of smaller size lots with sort of larger homes on them.
Yeah, so I got this an hour or so before our meeting, so I did a quick calculation. It seems like there's 84 properties under an acre. There are 70 properties that are between 1 to 2 acres, 36 properties between 2 and 3 acres, 8 properties between 3 and 4, 11 properties between 4 and 5, 4 properties between 5 and 6, 3 properties. I can send you this little chart. And then I quickly tried to say, I rounded down, and then I multiplied by a potential of up to 8 units.
Mm-hmm.
And then I added up each of the categories, and I came up with a total count of 4,504 potential condo units.
So Tim, if you did a
drew
tally right now in this spreadsheet where you did a sum of column C, how many acres do you get? I think what Denny's sort of idea there
is there a way for you to talk about something else for a minute? I'm changing rooms right now. Sorry, I can't.
That's fine, because that wouldn't. This is a rough estimate, and I did a lot of rounding down, and we're still at over 4,000 potential units, which is more than I was ever imagining, which made me think we should actually work on.
Yeah, I think we should study this list a little bit, is my sense too. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about is if we are about 500 units short of our 10%, and this, one of the goals of this is to address that. Another goal though is to preserve historic houses, right? So I think if we got a sense of which of these are more candidates for preserving historic houses versus, kind of thinking about addressing some of our housing shortfall, maybe between now and when we open the public hearing, we can give some thought to that. But I do want to point out that 500 units, if they were all, part of a development that was condominiums, we would need how many more units, right? We would need at least 1,000 units, because 25% of them would count towards the SHI and the others wouldn't. So when we're looking at 500 units, it's not 500 in total unless they're all rentals, right? Because they're part of larger projects. So I do think we have to think in larger numbers than maybe people are used to thinking about. And spreading them out means spreading them out. It's not putting them all on 1 or 2 or 3 lots or parcels. And I think that's another thing, is that I asked Tim if we could have the GIS Alan Bishop map these sites. And of course, he couldn't do it just quickly for today, but if we could get that done, and maybe, I don't know, if we, if we can get it done, if there's too much being planned for December 10th. But that was the reason I was asking about when we were going to open the public hearing, because I do think there is some consideration we might want to give to how many total. So 596 acres, is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and then times 8, you're right, your math is pretty close there, Denny. I guess my sense was that that's more than I was thinking it would be. So I think as you
Well,
were,
that's
Denny.
assuming, do you assume that everybody that owns these pieces of property is going to want to turn them into a condo? I don't think so. I mean,
even if a quarter do,
I realize
then-
that it's different than our normal zoning, which is so tightly drafted that it can only work for one lot. But I do think we should, take a look at this list to see if there are, as Cheryl has and Denny have suggested, other parameters, to increase the acreage that's required. I think that the idea behind it was really to provide a mechanism to save these old historic homes, and that was really what I was really looking for to do. And so, whether we have some other criteria that we add in there, I think that's fine. But I think we also, as I said, want to provide a mechanism so that these houses, these people have some other option besides selling off to developer for.
Well, and I think we also talked about not having an alternative to a small subdivision, where.
Yeah. Or you're dealing, I mean, you're adding, housing that it doesn't ever qualify for affordable and that sort of thing.
Right.
So, I think we could take a look. I don't, as I said, just because these are on the list doesn't mean people are going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be aware of the fact we're also trying to help preserve the character of the town, and these old houses looking the way that they do does that. And there's just not that many people that are interested in buying these big old houses that in most cases have a lot of capital improvements required. It's just not a feasible option. That said, I mean, that doesn't mean that every single one of these houses is going to be ready tomorrow. It also, like Cheryl said, these are impacts that are spread. These are very minimal impacts, and they're spread all over the town as opposed to giant apartment buildings in one neighborhood that will be impacted over others. So I think there's a lot of trade-off. Like Kathleen said, this is a very different way of doing zoning. There are people that just have a very different approach to zoning and would like to do things on a more site-specific basis. Unfortunately, that's, it has its consequences, and I think that's kind of what we're dealing with now. So we should look at this further. We can schedule it for as soon as we can get that map. I think that's a good idea to have a visual. We'll see what happens at the public hearing. We can always make changes to bring to the warrant committee or even meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to have a discussion with the public hearing, to have everybody, not just us weigh in on it, and not, just a couple random people. So.
Yeah,
but I do like the idea of having it be a discussion related to the housing production plan and getting to our 10%. Because that's one of the reasons this is the time frame that it's been taken up in, right?
Yeah. And I mean, some of these, if you look at through this spreadsheet, and I can't scroll through now, but some of them, even the ones on the screen, have already been converted to apartments. So they're not all single family.
They're already multi-family. There's
that would actually be a pretty good thing if we could layer that in, like Brush Hill Road, right? 333 Brush Hill Road, the Burr Estate on Milton Road, is it? So, excuse me. I think if we could, if that's something that you have.
He's already got them in. Some of them are already in here.
They're characterized, the ones
that okay, sorry. Okay.
Are permitted. But I mean, those could be a different color, and maybe that gives people an understanding of sort of what we're talking about. I mean, if there are already apartments that have been converted in some of these buildings,
maybe what we could do is get some aerials of what those look like too, or photos or something, like a street shot, because I think most people wouldn't even realize they're there.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was going to say that the impacts are probably so minimal. People that live next door or, down the street don't even realize it's an apartment building and still think it is a one family.
Right.
So anyways, I think that's all good information, and we should definitely continue the conversation and I do want to encourage people to participate in the public hearing. So I don't want my earlier comment that we're not going to talk about those comments today. I just think it's more impactful to have them all on the same night when we're scheduled to have the discussion in more detail. So now, are we good to move on to?
Yes, I am.
I actually just wanted to,
Jenny?
I did reach out to a few neighborhood leaders who are also town meeting members to see, to kind of suss this out from their neighborhood perspective. And they both sort of reached back with the same sentiment that this is just a really hard time for them during a pandemic and a holiday week. But they did have some concerns, mainly about, well, there was a lot of concerns, but mainly about the density of 9 units. In talking with them, I was wondering, is there a way to put in language to stop assemblage? In other words, if you're driving along Randolph Avenue, kind of near Milton Academy, Upper Canton Avenue, parts of Brush Hill Road, parts of Hillside, if you have assemblage with these condos, you could just have banks of them, properties lined up, So I wanted to put that bug in your ear that I think we should all be thinking about ways to limit that, because it was coming up with all the neighborhood leaders, that they were concerned that a part of a neighborhood could just be boom, condos. And one of the things
it says in the standards, I think that, you have to make sure, we have to make a determination that it's not deleterious to the neighborhood, and that it also, it fits in with the existing neighborhood. It can't be looking any different than the way the neighborhood looks now. And that they have to sort of, maintain the character of the neighborhood. So I think that's the idea that you would be getting blocks of condos seems hard to imagine how that would fit in with the way the bylaw is drafted.
So if in 2 years, in 2 years, somebody came and said, we want to put, 14, 23 condos here. Then a neighbor 3 doors down says, hey, I want to put condos in. How do we say no? Because we want you to be like the neighborhood. If the neighborhood already has condos 3 doors down.
Because there's case law that says just because you made a decision in one situation does not bind you to do it that way the second time. There's a case I just reported on a panel I was on just a couple months ago, where the planning board approved an A&R plan 10 years ago, and then found out actually that wasn't a street and they shouldn't have approved it. So when the second guy came in and he said, well, you approved the first one, and they said, well, yeah, we found out later it wasn't a street. Well, they denied it and they got upheld because, you're not bound by your former dumb decisions. So there's all sorts of cases like that. So you could very well say, like we could have, can say unfortunately to Mr. Burke, just because, the building permits got issued for the first 2 houses doesn't bind us to issue building permits for the rest. There's case law on that all over the place. So.
And I just from the text of the bylaw, so it says after conversion, the existing dwelling shall substantially reduce the appearance of a single family dwelling. And then the next requirement is that the design of any additional structures to be approved by the planning board shall be compatible with the design of the existing dwelling. So I think the point is that, and it seems clear to me in the zoning, although we can talk about this more, is that we want it to look substantially similar to the way it looks now.
The way it looks now, yeah.
To retain the character, not to put big blocks of buildings, fronting the street up on, what used to be the Carberry Street estate or something. So I think we should talk about that. And I think if we can have the zoning before us and go through a little presentation on what the zoning is intended to accomplish, and then comment and talk about our own comments about the specific sections. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of this is already resolved, and I'm hesitant to discuss it now when we haven't just gone through the zoning, because it's sort of a little haphazard.
But I want to be prepared. I just want we may be prepared with answers for, but if you want, I
Well-
can see these questions for the public hearing.
One of the things I would say that might help with that, visualizing that, is that map, because we'll get a sense of where these are and how close they are to one another. Because if you don't meet the criteria, there's no way you're going to you can even apply. And that doesn't even, and the other thing that I would say is that, I mean, I took a look at 4 sites, and I'm happy to take a look at more, not 200 sites, but, pick a few more to get an idea, pick a few small ones, pick a few mid-sized ones, just to get a sense of what these, which of these may or may not fall out of this list because they can't meet the other criteria. They can't meet the 20% open space. They can't meet the 30% open space and the 20% lot coverage, things like that. Because not all of these are going to be suitable. Some may have wetlands, some may have steep topography. And we have requirements that we put in there because of that. The wetlands don't count in terms of, you still have to have 30% open outside of your wetlands. And your open space can't be more than 8% slope. So there's those other criteria are going to, as Tim has said, will whittle this list down. This is the absolute max based on just the size of the lot, the size of the home, and the age of the home when it was built.
So it's interesting just scanning through this list. I mean, my neighbor across the street is on this list. And they could potentially convert their existing dwelling, but they couldn't add anything more to the site. So I think we'll find that when we map these, we're going to be able to see those things where, if an existing house turned into 2 or 3 or 4 condos in the existing dwelling with no changes exterior, people won't notice. But I don't know. I think it's a good conversation. I think it's helpful to hear. I don't know if you have more comments that you want to go through now, Denny?
I just had another question I thought we should ponder. And that is, what if a large type of property like a Curry College, what if they decided, the economy or something, they decided they were going to have to sell their whole property. They could close down completely, and that's 134 acres times 8 units would be 1,072 units. Or they may decide to sell a portion of their property and put condos on the outskirts or something.
Doesn't this only apply to single family residents?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They're not in this. They're not in this bylaw.
Okay, because they're not single family residents. Okay, so so that's a topic.
Actually, it says existing building. Does it still say existing building rather than existing residence?
It should say existing residents, right?
Well, I'm just looking at my older version says building under B1. I mean, I guess everyone's assumption was we were talking about a residence, right?
Yeah, it does say buildings.
It says building.
Existing buildings. So we want to say existing residential buildings or resident.
I think
Just say
residence, right? Or dwelling,
Okay.
a dwelling maybe?
Yeah.
However, the zoning bylaw calls it.
Okay.
Be
So
consistent.
do we want to change now before we send it to the select board?
That one I
We already
would.
sent it to the select board.
No, we didn't. We pulled it because we were going to have this meeting and we didn't know if there would be additional changes.
Okay, yeah.
So we're
I think
sending the
that's-
package. We're sending the package after tonight as a whole. So far,
Oh,
it's
okay.
bylaw.
I'd make
Okay.
that change.
Thank you.
Want to
I
make the
think that's
motion, Kathleen?
I'm sorry. I do have a question.
Okay,
I
go
have
ahead.
more. Okay.
Okay.
But thank you for accepting that change, Kathleen. On number 11, I had asked if wetlands could be excluded, and I noticed that you did on number 11. I was wondering if I could make that language just a little bit easier to read by crossing out the word total. So at least 30% of the land area of the lot. And instead of saying exclusive, could we say not including wetlands? I just feel like that would be clearer language.
I picked it up from other bylaws that we have that say that same thing. So I repeated other language. I think, what we're talking about is that 30% of the lot has to be open space. And so the wetlands and parking spaces and driveways are just things that you can't include when you have this requirement that 30% of it has to be open space.
Okay.
So I think it reads as well as it can, and I'm not so sure that change helps.
I think consistency in language is important myself. If
Okay.
that's the way it's written in other parts of the
That's the way we
bylaw.
have it in, I think, the cluster zoning and some other places was that same language, which is where I borrowed it from.
I was just trying to be really clear that, and it actually relates to number 3. I just wanted to be really clear. So we have a lot. We take out wetlands, we take out parking spaces, driveways, and then we get to usable land, and of that, there's 30% that's open, and then 20% is buildable, right?
Right.
Right. Okay.
20% of building footprint.
A building footprint. Yep. Okay. So I'm sorry to jump around, but going back to number 3, after 5,000 square feet, I wanted to add of buildable land for each additional condominium unit, so that the unit count isn't on the whole thing. It's taking out the wetlands, and then what's remaining, you figure out 20% of that. Not, in other words, not including the wetland in the calculation of how many units you can put in, because you really can't put units on wetland, so it shouldn't be part of that equation. So I just wanted to add, after square feet, say, of buildable land for each additional condominium unit.
I don't know if buildable land is defined though. Would you have to?
Yeah, if we had a floor area ratio provision, we could.
I don't.
Yeah.
What I don't want is I want the unit count to go down if a lot is like 50% wetlands, because we don't want them to get to do more units where they can't build them, or it's going to be jam-packed on top of wetlands.
They can't build it on the wetlands, and they still can only.
No,
build
but they
on
can't. But
20%.
that we don't want them to jam it up beside the wetlands. You know what I'm saying? We want the unit count to go down on lots that have wetlands.
But they would, because if you have to have 30% of the lot area as open space.
Right.
Well, I could see you could do smaller units in a building, I guess. You could reduce the size of the units.
Well, I just think that the wetland should be taken out of the equation. What you would do is you'd start with the pie this big. You would take wetlands off the table. The remaining land you would count as your acreage that you could put up to 8 units on, as opposed to, oh, we have a lot that's 3 acres when really you only have a 2-acre buildable lot. You have an extra acre that's wetlands, but that doesn't count as open space, and the wetlands don't count as buildable, so they shouldn't count as part of the potential unit count.
I think we do that, don't we? Isn't that?
I think we got that.
I don't think you have it unless you clarify that in number 3 and number 11. I actually ran it by a lawyer, and that's why I came back with this, because that was something that I stressed was important to me, that I wanted the wetlands to be taken out. So that was a concern of mine.
But you still, I guess I'm wondering how that is beneficial to, if it weren't wetlands and it was the same size piece of land, and you still have the same parameters of height, the same
So if you have
size of building.
if you have a 3-acre lot, right?
Mhm.
And it doesn't have wetlands, you could do a potential of up to 24 units, 8 times 3
Mhm.
potential.
Mhm.
If you have a 3-acre lot and 1 acre is wetlands, it's not right to put 24 units. You should only put 16 units.
So 1 acre out of 3 acres is right in and of itself is 33% of your land. And you can't count that as you might get hit up on your 24 units, not being able to fit it using our other parameters. So now you still have to do 30% of open space. That gets you to 60 or 63% of your land would have to be open space and wetlands, right? And
Yeah.
then you'd have to see what your setbacks do, because your setbacks may not be part of your wetlands or your open space if they're not the right dimension, because they have to be at least 15 feet, or the right
Right.
slope. They have to be a minimum less than 8%. And then you still have, so you may not get them because of the other parameters. Do you understand what I mean?
And the lot coverage can't exceed 20%. So all
Right.
those
Yeah.
combined would drive down the unit count. Did
Yeah.
you get feedback, Denny, on a solution for this from the lawyer that you spoke to?
Yeah, those 2 suggestions that I made, add the word buildable. After 5,000 square feet, say of buildable land for each additional condominium unit. And to clear up the language on number 3, add that phrase of buildable land. And then on number 11, just because the language is confusing for the average reader, and I just think it's good to have clearer language for the average,
I think
citizen.
it is
Yeah.
in 11. I think that's clear in 11. My problem with the putting it up above about buildable land is that that's not defined.
Right.
And what buildable land might be. I mean, what if you have ledge? I mean, what if you've got wetlands? What if you've got clay? What if you've got, all kinds of stuff? So I think I'm really worried about putting in language that can't be defined.
So I have a suggestion that even, we don't know, this is a hypothetical, and I know that the GIS mapping has wetlands on it. It may not be 100% as if you did a survey of each parcel, but I wonder, Tim, if you could check with Alan Bishop, if he can overlay the wetlands onto his mapping and just see how many of these lots might actually fall within wetlands.
Cheryl, I can. My understanding is that the wetlands layer is notoriously not great.
Okay.
So I'll run that up the flagpole with Alan, but I'm not confident we'll get a good result. So with the screen share up, I don't know what if people are doing gallery view. Rich, I don't know if you were trying to chime in earlier.
Yeah, I think I got my answer though. I was just confused about, and I can see it on number 11. It says exclusive of wetlands. So I get that. I get what Denny is trying to get to. I'm just trying to figure out, and I got to go through. I don't know myself where you would fix it, but I do agree with Denny. I mean, you wouldn't want somebody to build just a way bigger property, on such a small, on like a reduced portion that's buildable. So regardless of how you do it, I mean, could we figure out what is the right thing to do to put it in wherever it needs to go?
I think it goes back to 3. I don't think it sits in 11. That's different. That's talking about open space. So we would put back in 3, leave 11 as it is and go back to 3 and then take a look. I mean, obviously, so we've said the house that is going to be converted has to be on a parcel. If you have more than 3 units or more, it's got to have 10,000 square feet. The house is already sitting there. And so I think what we would probably be wanting to do would be talking about any additional structure would be limited.
So I have
the house is already there.
So I have a
The house is
suggestion.
there, sitting on there. So go ahead, Cheryl.
I am familiar with a parcel on Brush Hill Road that has an existing house, I think would meet this criteria, and has wetlands, and I have a site plan for it that shows where the wetlands are. What if I do just a test of what this would do for that parcel? This is the way I've looked at these things. It's hard to be hypothetical about it to me. I like to test these tools and see, if they work or if they don't work. So I'd like to test to see, at least on one site. And if there's others that Tim or that Alan could tell you, I'm happy to look at whichever one somebody could tell me. But I just happen to know and happen to have the survey of that one. And I'd like to test these things out and see how it would compare. So we can see whether this is something that's already covered, if you will, by our other criteria.
Because as I said, I think that makes sense. And I think I said, Denny, this is talking about a building a house that is already there. So it's already on.
Well, that's why I said add after additional. That's why I said after the additional 5,000 square feet of buildable land. If there's a better term than buildable land, but do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I'm trying to think about how we could, if I have a house and I'm going to turn that into 3 units, I've already got the house, I've already got the land. I don't see why.
Here you can add, it says here you can add another
so that's what I'm going for
5,000.
Let me just finish. So the first part of it is I've got a house and I want to turn it into 3 units and that's it. And I don't have to worry about the wetlands. I've got the house that's already there. And so maybe what you want to be worried about is if I'm adding additional buildings or structures or an addition to add in those extra units.
That's exactly what I'm worried about.
The existing house that I'm going to cut up and the servants will be turned into a bunch of micro units or whatever. That's all fine because that's an existing house and I'm not doing anything with the outside. And your concern is about taking on, putting in more buildings or more structures or whatever, and getting be able to do that. So that's a different issue. So I think I'll take a look at this and Cheryl can do the testing, but I think if we can figure out a way that we're addressing your concern about building more, adding something to the house, turning the carriage house or whatever, or putting in a new building on a lot, you shouldn't be able to do that if it's wet.
One thing I'll say about some of these homes when they were built, there were no wetlands regulations. So yeah, I suspect that some of them are wet already. And if we're trying to preserve the historic buildings, I certainly think that we wouldn't want it to apply to the existing structures. We wouldn't want it to disqualify the existing structures.
No, I don't think
that would go against what we're talking about doing. And
we would say you couldn't add a new building.
Well, if you have wetlands and that precluded you from doing it, you wouldn't be able to anyway.
Okay, well, I appreciate you taking a look at that section. Then I'm sorry, I thought we were going to have time to talk about these so I had spent a lot of time reading this, but I don't have to go over all my comments now. I can save some of them. But there is one that's actually rather important to me, and that is after number 13, I thought we could add a 14 that would say any area of critical environmental concern, ACEC, is excluded from the condominium conversion bylaw because the northern point of the Foul Meadow and Punkbog Bog ACEC includes 415 acres in Milton. And I provided a document in the share folder.
I read it.
Okay, good. So page 8 describes the area in Milton as beginning at the northern point of Neponset River on Paul's Bridge. The ACEC boundary proceeds northeasterly across Brush Hill Road to Milton Street, thence easterly on Milton Street to Blue Hill Avenue or Route 138, then southerly on Route 138 across the town line into Canton and all the way back to Green Street. So that's like that area. So I just wanted for people's background, in order to be designated as an ACEC, the following factors are reviewed by the Secretary of Environmental Affairs. threat to public health through inappropriate use, the quality of natural characteristics, uniqueness of the area, irreversibility of impact, imminence of threat to the resource, magnitude of impact. And on page 12, paragraph 1, the Foul Meadow and Ponkapog Bog ACEC designation by the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, she said, I find that the uniqueness of the ACEC derives from several factors. The Foul Meadow area of the ACEC includes the largest wetlands and flood storage area within the Neponset River Basin. It is one of the most significant wetlands in the metropolitan Boston region. The contrast between the open stretches of meadow and diverse wildlife habitat and the highly developed area that surrounds this is remarkable. The contrast is further underscored by the concentrations of state-listed rare species that occur within both the ACEC. The concentration of historic and archaeological sites adds up to the uniqueness of the area. I'll go on, I could go on and on, but at the bottom of page 12, it goes into the Natural Heritage Program and all the rare species in this area. And they talk about how in the southerly area, not in Milton, they allowed development in, and the habitats got irreversibly ruined through development. So we've been fortunate enough that there's AA zoning in our current ACEC, and that has maintained the health of the ACEC. So that's why I'm proposing that we do not include, that we exclude the condominium conversion bylaw for the area of critical environmental concern.
So I have two questions. Has that been mapped on our GIS mapping where that area is?
Yeah, I believe it is with Alan Bishop.
Yes, at least.
And do we know that there's any homes that were built in 1930 or before that fall within this area?
Yeah, there are.
But Denny, don't you think that this is a way to save those houses? You know, really, I just,
no,
I see what you're saying, and you know, I'm on the Mass Land Trust Coalition, on ACECs and all that sort of stuff. But the idea behind this is to save these properties from being turned into some, stupid development. And so to sort of say because you're on the old Hemingway estate that you don't get to do this condo conversion.
This goes way beyond the Hemingway estate.
No, but I'm just saying, for example, because I'm familiar with the Hemingway estate and those properties, is that the idea is to save those properties and to protect those properties. And so to say that because if you're in the ACEC, you can't do that, you're just going to be having a 40B instead, defeats the whole purpose.
Well, I think that the Secretary of Environmental Affairs would disagree with you that there shouldn't be more. The report goes on and on about impervious is detrimental. All these surface areas and this level of density, 9 units per acre on an ACEC is not going to work. It's not. That's not preservation. I think
the other regulations that exist in the state and the local regulations would prohibit that. But I tend to agree with Kathleen. I would consider this actually to be a tool to minimize impact in that area where you're driving people to reuse existing structures as opposed to tear them down and create new structures. But, to develop in the ACEC requires a whole set of regulatory compliance with state government as well as Milton government. So I think there are controls for that. But, I don't know. I would, frankly, this would be a tool for preservation as opposed to an incentive for dense development. But this is what the neighborhood wants.
What's beyond the neighborhood? I mean, I think that this is exactly what the ACEC doesn't want. They don't want this level of development.
I'm concerned that we peel away so many places that this won't be used anywhere. I mean,
well, I think right now we're open to 4,500 units in town. I think we could set some limits on this.
As I said, I strongly disagree because I really think I don't want to see those houses lost. I don't want to see them torn down for something else, or like some stupid mega mansion or whatever. I'd like to see those houses in those sort of areas saved and reused in a sensitive and great way. And I think by saying that this whole block can't even be considered, I think that just takes out those protections, and that sort of defeats entirely the purpose behind my drafting of this bylaw. So I hear you on the fact, but I think this is a way to protect properties and to protect that part of town and to protect the environment by allowing for reuse and sensitive redevelopment. And by saying that, no, you can't be having that kind of opportunity, you hold yourself open for something that's completely unattractive and not what you want to see. So I'm sorry, but I'd have to not agree to that.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree, and I'm going to have a hard time supporting this bylaw because I think it's opening up an ACEC to overly dense development. I don't think it's protecting or preserving. I think it's just,
How much of this area is wetlands?
a great deal.
Then it wouldn't qualify anyway, right? You couldn't build on it. I'm wondering if it's protected already through the wetlands portions of it. So I would be interested in seeing a map, and I'd be interested in seeing how many homes qualify for it, or would qualify under the bylaw that are within this district. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is that the idea is that we want to meet our 10%. If this is one of the tools that we want it to be, just the units to be dispersed throughout the town and not have neighborhoods completely free of having to absorb some of the 10%. And so I'd like to understand, if this would put whole sections of town out of consideration for absorbing some of the 10%. And I'd be interested in an equity aspect of that.
So can we figure some of that out? I mean, I'm hearing two different things. That we wouldn't want to cut it out, but then maybe it's not involved anyway. Because if it wasn't involved, then it wouldn't matter if you cut it out.
Yeah, I just don't have a good sense of the mapping of it and how many places, would be then taken off that list, and how much part of town that would be. Because I'm not as familiar with the boundaries as Denny is. That's why I was curious if we have mapping of it.
And do we?
Yeah,
I believe
I did.
Bishop has them.
I don't see a layer on our map.
it's in
But
GIS. It's in Mass GIS for sure.
well, I mean, we can get it, and so we can figure this out.
So while we're talking, I'm just looking up the state regulatory requirements. So any project that was going to impact it or take place in an ACEC would have to go through NEPA and this heightened environmental review process. So, I mean, development isn't prohibited in ACECs, but it's required.
That's because it already exists, and AA zoning works, but 9 units per acre is very different. And
well, I guess my point was going to be that the state would tell us, or tell the development proponent, whether or not it was appropriate or not appropriate for an ACEC.
And Rich and I live on 9 units per acre right where we are. That's what it is here.
I really thought we were trying to do something that was really going to improve areas, and I feel like this is really a disappointment. So,
I mean, I understand your point, Denny, and I hear what you're saying. I think you're saying you don't want to see in the ACEC a whole bunch of new construction that wouldn't otherwise be allowed. I think my point is I don't think that will be allowed even with the condo conversion bylaw, and I do think a condo conversion bylaw could give some of those properties, if they exist in the ACEC, an incentive to the property owner or a future property owner to keep the structure in place and keep it looking the way that it does now, with the same impacts as exist today, as opposed to the, having no tool available could lead to some of the junky development proposals like we've seen. And maybe the ACEC would be enough to stop a 40B proposal, but there's no guarantees of that. And so I think what I'm trying to do, or my interest with this bylaw, is to create a different opportunity for some of the sites that can really preserve the character of what exists today. And I don't know that, I don't feel that strongly about it. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with your change, but I'm not going to fight it. If that's what you want to do, we can make that change. I just think be detrimental to the neighborhood or to the area of town, because I think there are other restrictions in place with the regulatory requirements of development in ACEC that would stop the type of impact that you're worried about. And that's beyond the town of Milton. That's state regulatory framework. So
My experience is different, and I know that developers are lined up trying to get in here, and I know they're chomping at the bit. And if you open it up to condos, it's gone. It's irreparable damage, and you can't get it back. And it's real habitat for significant species, and I don't want any part of it.
Denny, isn't it already open up today to 40B development?
It is. But I think this bylaw is more damaging than a single 40B, because it's just opening it up. The whole thing is getting opened up to condos.
Well, then that applies outside of the ACEC too, then, I mean,
Yeah, well, I'm beginning to worry about that too. If we're looking at 4,500 condos, I am concerned. I don't think that we're ready for prime time. I
mean, Danny, the same would apply with the cluster bylaw. We can go through and calculate how many possible units could be developed under the cluster bylaw, which exists today and was presented on the floor of town meeting as a tool to stop 40B, which it clearly hasn't done. And we've seen development from it. So I think, yes, we need to look at the possible ramifications, but I think to assume that every one of these properties that could potentially be eligible is going to be developed under this bylaw is not correct.
Well, I think a third of this number is high. I don't think
you'll get a third. Seriously, if you got 5 in a year, I'd be shocked.
5 in a decade, probably.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. I mean, it's like the accessory dwelling unit thing. How many times have you've done 5, 1 a year in the last 5 years? I mean, it's not like people are saying, oh my God, I can hardly wait till this happens. And hundreds of people are coming into the planning board, by the way, and we don't have that many meetings. So it's not that you wouldn't even approve all of them in that period of time. I mean, the assumption that all of these people are just standing there saying, oh my God, I can hardly wait.
Then if it's only 5, then we should just go back to the way that Alex did it and do a very, site specific, not spot zoning, but more site specific. So we're actually meeting the needs of the developer and the neighborhood.
No, because then what we're doing, it's not fair to
It's
not fair to the particular neighbors of development where people happen to buy property. And what the town has done in the past is just kick this down the road to today when we have 7 of them, because we've just been kicking it and not dealing with it. And it's a hard thing to deal with, but we have to deal with it. And we have to look for an equitable solution that's shared across the town.
So, I mean, I tend to agree. I think we could look at site-specific zoning. It hasn't solved our problem. We've heard from residents meeting after meeting after meeting that we're not doing enough. We're not planning ahead. We're not doing enough to protect these neighborhoods. We have a housing production plan. One of the action items in the housing production plan is to amend our condo conversion bylaw. And those specific suggestions match with what we're proposing. Not everybody's going to love it. It may or may not pass town meeting, but I think we have an obligation based on all of the controversy over the 740Bs that nobody wants to see move forward to do something differently. And just doing the same thing hasn't fixed the problem. So maybe this is a part of the solution. I don't know. I don't think there's a silver bullet solution here. I don't think just saying, oh, what the heck, let's approve 740Bs and forget about it is an answer. I don't think saying this one cluster bylaw was our answer and now our job is done. I mean, there's a lot of different pressure points we have to hit to get to the place where, every neighborhood isn't vulnerable. I mean, 40Bs are popping up literally everywhere in town, and who knows how many are percolating as we speak. So this is one tool to try to help us solve the problem while also protecting what we think right now is the character of the neighborhoods. And that's a lot of these historic homes. Not everybody's going to agree with that. And I respect your opinion. I respect everybody's opinion. We probably should move on to the next item and get into this discussion with the members of the public when we have our hearing.
Can we at least make that change to the word building in that one paragraph to residence or dwelling, April?
Yes.
Right? Okay.
So, I mean, Denny, in respect of your position, do you want to revote the whole article and sending it to the select board?
Yeah, I'm currently not in support of it. I don't think it's ready.
Then
Can we, at some point, I'd like to, I mean, I'm hearing what Denny's bringing up. I mean, she's bringing up, I mean, to me, good points, but I'd like to, I want to know more about it and see more. And so I'm confused. So I agree, like maybe revoting. But is this the end of the discussion on the ACEC, or should I just go off and read about it myself? And
I mean, we can discuss it, continue to discuss it now.
no, we don't even discuss it right now. I'm just saying.
So
if we're going to get an
Rich,
article, sorry.
Rich, what I can do is I'm going to be working with our GIS department to map the properties on tab 3 in that spreadsheet, so we can get an idea of where exactly in town they are. It's not a heavy lift to overlay the ACEC boundaries onto that, so we'll be able to see where the ACEC is, and B, which eligible houses are there. The wetlands layer, I'm a little less optimistic about, but I'll give it a shot. So at least we'll have that on a map, and we can kind of see the magnitude of the issue. I would also be interested in looking into, and Denny, I may enlist your help in this. My understanding is again, as April brought up through the MIPA process, that there is, we're not talking, 40Bs here. You got to go through the process, and that includes a Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act, review process. I'd like a little more kind of information on kind of how those go, and do they provide kind of meaningful restrictions on development? Because I think, especially when you're dealing with the area of critical environmental concern, that is a state program, and you want to rely on the state to offer the protection that it's supposed to protect. So again, the answers to those questions may moot this issue, or it'll kind of clarify the conversation, but I'll start working on getting that information together.
I appreciate that.
And I just like to say, like just like we've done in the other zoning articles, we've modified them after we've heard public comment during our public hearings, and what gets voted on at town meeting could be different. And if we find that there's problems that are kind of hard to address in the time frame that we have, we can also pull it and send it back to ourselves for further study. So I think I support moving it forward with this one change, and I am interested in seeing that mapping, and I'm interested in looking at that list and understanding how our tools are going to sort of self-regulate, so we're not looking at the quantity, at the total of the maximum quantity that we just talked about. And there might be other layers that we want to consider besides the ACEC that factor into this. So I would support revising the approved language that we had voted to send to the select board by changing the word in paragraph B1, buildings, to residence.
Residences? Or
Well, now it says
residence. I see.
dwellings.
Says dwellings, I think.
Oh, it changed from building already to dwellings. Okay.
Yeah.
It reads now as dwellings?
Well,
It's on
it
the
just-
screen right now.
So would the
Tim had
question,
fixed it. Tim
was
fixed
Tim's
it
suggestion
earlier
tonight.
while we were having this discussion.
Oh, okay. So the question I have is, would a dormitory be considered a dwellings? Because to address, I agree, I wouldn't want Curry to be able to apply for this in any way, unless they have like a historic home that's on a separate site, that's an individual site that could apply. And because that makes sense to me, but not, campus wide.
Well, I suppose we could say one or more existing dwellings. That doesn't make any sense
I
anymore.
wouldn't say.
How many buildings do they have that have frontage on a public way?
Yeah,
The houses that they bought on Brush Hill Road do.
yeah. Well,
I don't know how many there are, but they've been
are they
buying
in,
them.
are they in their own districts? So parcels in one or more existing, we could say single family dwellings.
Yeah, because the ones that have already been converted, actually, we don't want to apply, right?
Yeah,
necessarily.
I just counted them a few minutes ago. There's like 10 or 12 that are either apartments or townhomes already.
Yeah.
So I think single family seems to make sense to me.
Yeah,
That's what we're really thinking of.
Yeah.
So can I make that do we need a motion? Is that my?
Yeah, that would be.
That would be my motion.
One.
To change the word buildings to single family dwellings.
Yeah.
In B1?
Right.
Yeah.
Or we can just re-vote the whole thing over again without an amendment. Just vote on this text.
Yeah.
Send to the select board because.
Okay. What?
So I need to know what the change is though. So
Yes,
in B1,
Single
In
family
B1,
dwellings.
one at a time,
single-family
please.
dwelling.
Single family dwellings, more existing single family dwellings.
Yes.
And you're also going to want to change it at the purpose at the very beginning.
Up above. He did that already. Oh, no, he didn't. Yeah. Dwellings. Just say dwellings. Yeah.
But did we want to say single family dwellings?
I guess we could. Yeah, sure.
Well, no, because it says the purpose is to permit dwellings. The purpose isn't to permit single family dwellings.
Okay.
No,
okay.
it's dwellings to be converted.
So it's single family
If
dwellings to be
existing
converted.
dwellings not
I see.
appropriate.
Okay, yeah.
Single family dwellings. Yeah, it goes in there. Yep.
All right, then I will make a motion to send this special permit 17 condominium conversion to the select board for consideration for the warrant for the February 2021 special town meeting.
And I will second.
Do we have any further discussion? We will take a roll call vote. Denny Swenson?
I oppose because 4 neighborhood leaders, town meeting members reached out and asked that we not rush this into the February meeting. And given that the parameters are too broad at the time, I do not think we're ready.
Cheryl Tagayas?
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell?
Yes.
Rich Beeler?
Yeah, you have the votes. But I'm just gonna be no vote. I'm waiting to see that other information and obviously Tim, you're gonna send it, so it's relevant, but I'll just abstain.
You're going to abstain or no? Which vote?
Just not voting.
Okay, April Anderson, yes. Okay, now let's move on to the accessory dwelling units. We have a draft. We have 2 drafts, but we want to review draft 2 in our box from November 17th. And I believe this includes revisions with comment from the the building commissioner. But Kathleen, do you want to run us through this?
Yes, so we did get some comments from the building inspector. And so, as I said in my comment that now that the screen stops moving, Jesus.
I'm trying to, I had deleted, I had X'd out of Outlook. I want to bring up the building commissioner's comments. Sorry.
Oh, okay. You're making me dizzy.
Just close your eyes.
So Joe had, the building commissioner had a general question about whether we would take out the existing zoning for the temporary apartment. Which we could do, because it's really a terrible, I mean, it's not a very well-written article, and we could vote, that would be a separate article that we would just vote to delete that from the zoning bylaw. And then I did add in that it was a single family dwelling. We already had that. It has to be located in a single family house or essential, and it has to retain the character of a single family dwelling. So I've done that. Under the current bylaw, the technical temporary apartment is that even if you wanted to sell the house to somebody who needed a temporary apartment for their mother, you have to rip everything out, and then they have to apply and they have to put it back in. So I did add in the end provisions about what happens if it's terminated, what you have to do. So Tim, if you could go back to the draft, there are some provisions in there for ripping it out if you have violated the permit, if you don't no longer qualify. So I've added that language in, and I believe that I put in the use of the accessory dwelling unit is prohibited, to use it as an Airbnb. I added that as an additional violation. And I took out the language about the using you had to have a separate egress, and under his suggestion, so I crossed that out. So you can see that change in number 8. So I think I've addressed all of his questions and comments.
Kathleen, had I passed around the question about the other provision of the zoning about the sort of caretaker units?
I did add language in here that says that it has to be, I think it's in number 8, the new number 8. One of the tenants maybe, I thought I had added that in there. That you could have a caretaker or au pair.
I didn't see that, but I did see that in a comment, which I thought was good.
Yeah, I sent comments too with that comment. Because it's kind of strange, like Joe points out that it's allowed as in an accessory use, so it's not necessarily in the provision of the ADU part of it, but it's in the accessory, so it's in a different section, I think.
Yeah, I have to say that I got that comment from somebody else who said, "Oh yeah, we have another bylaw that handles caretakers and that sort of thing."
Yeah, that I think came from Joe.
I wanted to scream because our zoning code is such an impossible thing to read. The index is terrible. I mean, I wish we had some money in the budget to hire somebody to reorganize it, because I can't find anything.
Well, I mean,
Kathleen,
like
you'll be thrilled to know that we do, and we did.
Yeah.
There's a bylaw review committee that's currently readying our zoning bylaw for insertion into the general code online software system. So they're working with the clerk's office on that.
Well, the planning board allocated 10 grand of our money several years ago. We've got no report back on whatever happened to it. I mean, it's like, trying to use this zoning code is impossible. Just like I pointed out last time, you go through the whole lot coverage thing and you think you know what it covers, and then there's a little sentence that says this doesn't apply to single family residential. And there's stuff like that all over the place, thrown over in a section you don't even know to look at. It's crazy.
So I didn't even know. Yeah, I didn't even know there was a caretaker thing. But I mean, even if you had a caretaker, well, I mean, this is sort of drafted so that the caretaker is taking care of somebody. So So I don't think that we have this drafted so that, a caretaker would live in the unit.
So for
accessory dwelling.
example, I do know of a property where the owner of the property lives abroad for the most
Yeah.
part and has a caretaker living on their property.
Yeah.
So how does this apply or not apply? Or how does that address? So that's not necessarily
I
somebody
don't
taking
think it
care of a
is.
person, but it's somebody taking care of a property.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I wish I could get back to my screen, my own draft, rather than looking at this because it's driving me crazy. So, I don't know how to on this. When you're in Zoom, how do you?
You can, if you press escape, you'll get out of full screen and you can have this as a separate window.
Oh man, yeah. Okay.
So, but if, let's
Thank
see,
you.
I guess it's paragraph 9, that's the occupants, right? Is that what you, or now it's 8, okay. Well, I guess the thing that we could say is, you could refer to this other section that allows the accessory.
Oh, I added in B. So in 8B on the latest draft, the newer one that I had, I added or be either an au pair or other caretaker who is providing child care or adult care to the owner occupant. Now that wouldn't address somebody who's just watching the property, but in my last draft under 8, the new number 8, formerly number 9, I have, or, either you got to be a relative or an au pair or other caretaker who's providing child care or adult care to the owner occupant. So I do have that.
I'm just trying to see.
I don't see that in our draft, in that shared draft. While we're searching for that, can I ask a question about the expiration section G?
Yeah.
So the permit shall terminate for all of these reasons. I'm confused by number 3. So what happens? All right. So it expires 4 years from the date it was issued, unless you file an affidavit with the building commissioner. If you do that, it's good indefinitely?
For another 4 years. Yeah.
Okay. Why wouldn't we want to just say it's good until the parcel turns over or there's some changing event?
Well, the way that the existing, I took it from the existing one, the temporary accessory unit now has a 4-year term. And when I checked with the zoning board to see, when I checked with Beverly to see what happens, and she said most of the time people have missed that and they have to come back to the zoning board for, permission to, get a new one. But they waited until, they have to do a whole new application for a whole new special permit. Because she said most of the time that's what happens, is that people forget that they expire in 4 years.
Well, that's what I was thinking. And I'm thinking, what's the benefit of us having people keep every 4 years filing it? I mean, they're gonna have to put like a Google alert on their phone or something.
Well, yeah, and then you got to pay for the advertising and, all the rest of that sort of stuff.
I guess I'm thinking, like, is there a benefit to having that language? Why wouldn't we just say, if there's any change to any of these, or just take that out? I mean, you permit your house and it lasts forever, unless you're making a change. Why would this be different?
As I said, it was the older one, so I just carried it along because we had.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just saying, I feel like we have pretty good rules here. Do we need that number 3? Because it's not only creating a burden for the homeowner, it's creating a burden for the building inspector who's going to be receiving these affidavits 4 years from who knows how many people, and they just don't know what the benefit of this is. Other than giving the town the option of telling people they have to rip it out because they didn't file their paperwork. I mean, that doesn't seem.
Yeah, well, that's the result now. Was it? Well,
that's what I mean. I think that's one of the major burdens.
Yeah.
And
there's another major burden of when they sell a property, you have to rip it out.
That's what I mean. So it's That's why, I mean, that's why one covers that, though. I mean, like sale of
Right,
the
okay.
file an affidavit, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Now they have the
Yeah, I would-
responsibility as the
Okay,
homeowner to
yeah.
follow
Yeah,
these
well,
rules.
yeah, and the other thing is that, if you're doing you're doing a rehab of your unit, of your house, and you want to add the accessory dwelling, right now, it has to be an existing building. So you have to build your extension and then rip it out and come get permission and then start again. I mean, it's just, it's crazy. And as I said, and selling your house, even if I sold it to somebody who wanted it, the apartment, we have to rip it all out. So it doesn't make any economic sense or any environmental sense to make people do that. I don't see a problem. Yeah, maybe the only thing is that people were thinking, well, 4 years, you'd be able to check to see whether or not it's still being occupied by my mother-in-law or, or
Well,
somebody.
it says in here that the building inspector has to be able to inspect it, right?
Yeah.
Where I can't find that section now, but it
Yeah,
says
I
somewhere
have
in
no
here.
problem taking it out. No.
I guess I'm just thinking if they comply with all of these other requirements, and if you sell your house, the new owner has to file an affidavit that says they too are going to comply with the requirements. If, they no longer live in the house, then you have to rip it out. If you use it as a short-term rental, you have to rip it out.
Yeah.
If you violate any other terms of the permit, then you have to rip it out. I mean, why would we need a piece of paper every 4 years that people are just going to forget?
Yeah.
Especially if it puts them out of compliance, right?
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
It just seems
Okay.
like trying to, like, if people are, I guess my problem with this whole idea in Milton is that we have this bylaw that's so impossible to follow. It makes no economic sense that people are just doing this illegally. And I'd like to give people a path to legally follow the rules and do this in a way that I think everybody wants to do. So write it so that it makes sense. And this paper for years isn't changing anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, the concern, I think you're right, is that there's a lot of this going on and people are doing it illegally. And we don't have any way to tell that, they make sure that they're safe. I mean, what we're worried about is that, people aren't, got the right smoke detectors, fire exits and all that sort of stuff because they're sneaking these apartments in.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason why they're doing it is because we make it impossible to do it legally.
Well, yeah. Our existing temporary is a terrible, pretty terrible example of accessory dwelling units.
So Kathleen.
So yeah, I don't have a problem taking that out.
I don't know what other people think of it. It's just, that was my feedback.
I have no problem taking it out. Kathleen, on the what we were talking about there in terms of paragraph.
Cheryl, can I just interrupt really?
Sure.
Can I just interrupt really quick? I apologize. The version that I have on the screen right now, I just emailed to all of you. This was a draft that slipped through the cracks for me. This is what Kathleen was referring to. It's actually, I think, identical to the one that's in the folder, except it has this bit in 8. So you all have that now in your inbox, and we're looking at it on the screen. So that'll be the kind of going forward version.
So
that we're
can we
looking
go
at.
back to that, Tim?
To 8?
Yeah, which is, I think, where we were before, while we were looking for this, what April went to that other section. But here, could we have a subparagraph C, which says, or whatever, C here that says something about a caretaker? So that would be something which is, if we look at what Joe had sent us before, living quarters to be occupied by an employee of the owner or occupant of the dwelling. And it says, however, that such employment is of the type customarily incident to the use of said dwelling. I don't know if that's the same language you'd want to use, but I'm just reading that from his email, that's what's included in the language under accessory use.
So that's
Sorry,
that's
you're just gonna have to tell me what you want me to write, because I can't go back and forth.
No, I'm just asking Kathleen if she thinks that kind of pulling from that language.
Well, I mean, that's it. That's expanding as I said, the temporary apartments wasn't were never supposed to be for employees. So that's sort of expanding the idea, which I'm not opposed to. I don't think there are that many of those kinds of. So I'm looking for accessory. So you said it's an accessory uses in
Well,
our
Joe
zoning bylaw.
said it was in, let's see, section 3B1F, accessory uses.
I got it. Okay, so we would add to, Tim, we would add to ours.
Because he says here, this has been used several times over the past few years to create dwelling units where, for example, the parents live and also act as au pairs. These units are then, because we don't allow it to be in a separate structure right now. It has to be part of the main structure. So the only way for you have an ADU right now in a separate structure is to do it this convoluted way.
Oh, I know, yeah.
So, I mean, it makes no sense to me why it has to be in the same structure and not in over a garage or something like that, if you're allowing it otherwise.
Okay.
He's suggesting consolidating the two, which basically means you would remove it from the accessory use section.
Well, it could stay there. I mean, you don't have to futz around with that, but what we would do, Tim, in this draft is we would say under C, right there, or C, it would say, let me see, either or C, an employee of the owner or occupant of the principal dwelling
Do we have the other word B before the word and?
or B, or B, yes, that's right. The principal dwelling, provided, however, that such employment is of the type customarily incident to the use of said dwelling, of said principal dwelling. So that's the caretaker language that's in the accessory use provisions already.
That makes sense to me.
So it's not like I could have, the bookkeeper from my law firm living in there. It has to be, a caretaker.
And this is language already in our zoning in another section?
It's already in our accessory uses. I just pulled it out from page.
So Kathleen, I think in order to kind of fully address Joe's concern, I kind of do think that we need to take this out, just because if you create two different ways to do this, what prevents someone from choosing this way, which we already see as a loophole that the building commissioner doesn't like, rather than doing it in the new way that's in the new ADU bylaw? Does that make sense?
I think we should propose to strike it from the accessory use section. Strike that paragraph F.
The whole caretaker section?
Yeah, in paragraph F, because we're accommodating here now. I agree with Tim that you don't want it in two different places.
Duplicative, yeah, I agree.
I said, I didn't even know we had it in two different places. So
good thing Joe pointed it out, right?
It was news to me. Not having committed the entire zoning code to memory.
It's impossible.
So
is there any need for a separate section for caretakers, which I assume is probably an antiquated piece of our zoning bylaw from when this was a customary practice, but I mean, is there anything that we're missing that would warrant keeping that separate that anybody can think of?
There's really not much more language to it.
I don't
April?
think so.
Don't you
Then
think
what's
that
here?
probably predated this ADU as it exists now in our zoning?
Probably.
Yeah, I would say you're probably right.
So I think for the purposes of whenever there's a motion, just because I don't think we should spend the time doing it now, we'll need to amend this draft with language striking this and striking the existing temporary apartment
Yep.
language. So no need to do it now, but just so that the motion reflects that the draft will include that language.
I have a question about striking the existing. What does that do for the ones that are currently permitted under the existing bylaw?
Well, I don't think it strikes their permit.
So what happens when their 4-year permit time runs out? Do they
They'd have to
fall
come in
under?
with they'd have
the
to get
new
the new one.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess we'd have to make sure we do some outreach on people understanding
Which
that.
they probably want, because the existing one says you got to record the permit with the names of all your kids in there. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
I also had
Talk
some
about
comments. I
privacy
think,
violation.
Tim, you had them up. And Kathleen, did you look at the comments I sent? I think you incorporated some of them, but I think you had a question about one and you didn't address my parking suggestion, I don't think. So I do want to get to those comments if we can. So Kathleen, you suggest that what wasn't clear to me is clear to you in the language, that this applies to existing dwellings, proposed dwellings, or additions to existing dwellings under section B.
Mm-hmm.
Because our current one doesn't, you're required to put these in existing dwellings, which causes a problem. Because
Right.
if you need to do an addition to actually accomplish it, you have to go to the Board of Appeal to get that done. And I just want to make sure that we fix that with this language.
I think, so an existing accessory structure. So you could take out the word existing and just say it's either in the single family house or an accessory structure. I thought we were trying to sort of limit how many of these could be done. And so my thought was that, yes, if you had like a garage in the backyard or whatever, which is too small for your car, you could convert that garage into a unit, which is not what you can do now.
Right.
And now it has to be in the house. It can't be a separate dwelling, a separate building.
Right. And to me that that makes sense in some cases, but oftentimes, well, I've seen several instances where people have had to do an addition to fit the dwelling unit in. And
Yes.
so it doesn't make sense. And if it made sense to do it in an already existing carriage house, why not? It makes no sense to me that you wouldn't be able to do it.
So this allows you to do that.
Okay.
You can put it in an existing dwelling or in an existing accessory dwelling. So you can't build a new unit in the backyard, but you could.
But that's what this is done so many places where you're actually building a new one, what's not part of the main house.
So all I'm saying is that we could cross in B, we could cross out the word, or it says, or an existing accessory structure, you could just say, or an accessory structure, which would allow you to build a new one, a tiny house in the backyard.
I mean, in some cases that might actually be better than globbing onto an existing one. I mean, sometimes architecturally it's hard to design one of these things as an addition, but
This is just a question of whether people want to make that change. That's fine with me.
I mean, I guess the only issue I would say is like some of our accessory structures are allowed to go further into our setbacks. And I wouldn't want a dwelling unit necessarily a new dwelling unit as an accessory to go into the setback further.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that makes it too difficult to change this language.
Yeah, I have concerns about that. I think in theory it's a great idea. I think it's one step too far. for right now to allow a tiny house construction on a yard. I just feel like given our conversation, it's going to be challenging to get people.
All right, so that's
I
one,
think-
that's
I
one
think-
for our larger discussion, I think.
Yeah, I think we'll
the
leave it.
intent with this was really to see, again, this is from the housing production plan, to see if there's a way that we can make some modest changes to make this bylaw workable for people, largely the way it works today, so that we can get people to permit their existing dwelling units if they have them, accessory dwelling units, or to provide opportunities to add them for their repair, for their elderly parents, or whatever, in a way that's not incredibly cost prohibitive. And I think adding, another structure, something that could liken to the size of a shed on the property, people would think that was a lot different than what we're allowing today. And
So what are you
Yeah.
suggesting that we strike out this existing accessory structure too then?
I mean, is that what's in our language now?
No.
No, you can't do,
It's
you
different, yeah.
can't.
I mean, the thing about this is if you had certain instances where you have a carriage house, that would be a great use of conversion.
no.
But if you have a one-car garage that's 3 feet from the property line and you want to convert that, that's a different scenario.
But that's an
You know what I mean?
existing structure, so that actually doesn't bother me. I think the idea of adding another structure to the site
Okay.
is more challenging, but I don't know. I'd like to hear other people's thoughts. I mean, if you have an existing garage and you're just repurposing that existing structure, I don't think people would feel that was disruptive.
An existing one-car garage would be a pretty small unit, by the way.
I think all of these are
It's
pretty small.
probably like 400 square feet, 20
Well,
by
yeah, but
20 at
most
most.
of them, like in my neighborhood, most of the garages are too small to put your car in.
Yeah, but
mine is.
wouldn't they be too small to be an ADU too?
Yeah, well, no, probably not.
I have a pickup. You'd never get it. I could never get it in my garage.
Well, I guess, I think
let's
leaving
leave it-
existing
let's
the
leave
way
it the way
it
it
is.
is.
Yeah,
I'd leave it the way it is.
okay.
And not allow for construction of another building.
Right, yeah.
And just the sanitary code provides kind of the floor for
Yeah.
what the size of a unit could possibly be. So, there's a kind of a lower limit to what you can conceivably do. 400 feet is plenty of room to live in. Not plenty necessarily, but you can imagine other kind of, configurations where, you can't open up the stove without hitting the windowsill, in which case you're not going to be able to do it.
Okay, so then I think my next comment had to do with paragraph 8, which you struck. I don't know if anyone had any comment about that. The next one I had, we just talked about, which is the caretaker. And then lastly, what I had was the parking. And what I was thinking is we align it with our residential districts, because you're only required 1 per dwelling unit in the C district. So I don't see why we would increase it for an ADU situation. Increase the requirement.
1 off street. Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I know. That's the way it is now, I think, in the temporary one.
Yeah, but it doesn't match up with what's required in our C district. Our C district requires 1 per dwelling unit, not 1 per bedroom. And the other districts all require 2 per dwelling unit. So 1 per bedroom seems too high to me.
Yep. Well, it's for each bedroom in the accessory dwelling unit. So what if we just said, well, and that's probably only give you 1 bedroom anyway. So,
but we allow 2 in the existing.
Yeah.
And do we allow 2 here? Are we silent on it?
We're silent, but it's only
no more than 2 bedrooms. 3.
No more than 2. Right.
Right. So you could require 2 per unit for the dwelling and 1 per unit for the primary in a C district, the way this is written, which doesn't make sense to me.
All right. So then what you want to change that to just say 1 off-street parking shall be provided for each, for
ADU.
the 4.
Yeah.
For each, well, you only have one. You can only
One
have
is
one.
allowed,
on-
yeah.
Only one per ADU. Yeah, one per unit.
Yeah. Okay.
And it doesn't change the requirement for the district, for the primary
Right.
home.
Okay.
So how exactly should I write that in 4?
So it's for each accessory dwelling unit, one off-street parking space shall be provided for the accessory dwelling unit, in addition to the parking required for the principal dwelling unit. Does that work?
That works for me.
Rich and Quiet, do you have thoughts on this? This bylaw?
No, I'm following. I have nothing to add right now.
I mean, I get what you're saying for District C, but I think, you know, if you're on like, I don't know, Randolph Ave or Center Street or like Upper Canton Ave, I mean, there's just nowhere to park on the street, you know, like Randolph Ave, or, you know, there's the Hillside Street. There's just nowhere to park on some streets. So
My concern, Denny, is that we only have, like, even in our AA, 2 per unit required. And you could have a 10-bedroom house and still only have 2 required for that. And now you're going to have a maximum 900 square foot unit required to have 2 parking spaces. It just seems like it's overburdening the ADUs. I mean, if we feel like we need more
I mean, I
parking,
have a
then-
feeling that you're not going to put the 2-bedroom ADUs in the smaller in the smaller C districts. I think that they're going to go in the bigger districts.
This is a minimum anyway. So like if somebody, I don't know, I've been involved with 3 ADUs in Milton. 2 have been for widows and 1's for an elderly couple. And so I don't know how many Joe Prondak sees, but it might be worth asking him, you know, how many
They don't
occupants.
get, I know, I mean, I was on the ZBA, and as I said, I checked with Beverly, and there were like maybe 5 applications in the last 5 years. And actually, and 2 of them were renewals. So it doesn't
Well,
come
But
up that
are
often.
they're all over town, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
everywhere, old
Yeah.
and new houses, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the 3 that I've been
And what they
involved
have
with
to
all
come to the
needed.
Denny, what they have to come to the ZBA for is that they need a variance, because our existing bylaw says that you have to put the new unit in an existing dwelling. So if you're doing an addition to the house, and so you're putting in a garage and you're going to put an apartment above the garage for your mother, you have to build the whole thing and then rip out the kitchen or whatever, rip out the walls, come into the ZBA to get the variance, and to allow you to put in the accessory dwelling unit in this new addition.
Not only that, you have to have separate entrance and you have to not change the look of the house. It's like these houses are just not that suited for it.
Yeah.
It's like almost
I'm taking away
impossible to
Marion
meet the
to get this
requirements.
business. Right. It's kind of crazy. You have to rip the whole thing out after you build it so that you can, move your mother-in-law in. So,
It's already
yes.
stressful enough time for people who are looking to do these either for elder parents or for other reasons, financial or otherwise. And, this just adds burden. I mean, I think if you spoke to Marion, who does a number of these, she'd be able to tell you that the way this bylaw is currently written, there's burden that's added. Yeah.
So I think 1 parking space for the dwelling is fine. You can't park on the street anyway. You're not allowed, overnight in Milton, anywhere that I know of. So
I just didn't want to put people in an unsafe situation, but if people can't park overnight on the street anyway, then I guess they'll have to
can't.
find a way to park on the property.
yeah.
Or get a ride. I don't know. I don't know. Uber, I don't know.
Well, I think that's actually one of the controls is if you don't have it, you can't identify an additional parking spot, you can't qualify.
Then you can, right.
Kathleen, you mentioned Beverly. Did you run this by, I think Mary McKettrick would be a great person. And I also think the chair of the ZBA, because this is really going to be before the ZBA. Like, we've never had these. So
I did talk to Marion and I talked to Ned Corcoran, both of them.
because I think that the chair of the ZBA would be very helpful. I bet he'd provide really great feedback. I just think in preparation for the public hearing, I would be really interested to hear from him before I did my final sign off after the public hearing. Just because he's got your experience and more with the ZBA, so that'd be great.
I can send
He
it to
might
him.
catch something.
I did send it to him a while ago, but I never heard
good.
anything back. But I'll send him
Okay.
again.
Thank you. I just think it's helpful.
Yeah.
So no surprises on town meeting floor.
Yeah.
Kathleen, just one quick thing. This H, is this, this may or may not be new from the previous last draft?
It is new. That's why it's in yellow. And that was to add penalties, which we have in the other one, and Joe had mentioned that. So we just wanted to, we hadn't mentioned what happens when you are no longer occupying the accessory unit in accordance with the special permit. And so it just sets up the violations for the building commissioner. And that's in the existing one, and I just carried it over to here.
So does this mean that the building commissioner needs to have the right to inspect only after the permit has been terminated?
No, that's just an additional, provision. Okay. I mean, he's always got the right to inspect. I mean, a building commissioner can always check for health and safety violations. They don't have to have special permission for that.
So do we need this for the removal of a stove from the,
as I said, that's what's in the existing one.
was that one of his comments, that that's all you have to do to no longer be in compliance? Or to be no longer, so you could still have the full unit, you just pull out the stove and now you don't have. Do we want to do that?
It's the bill, I think it's a state building code. It's no longer a dwelling, it doesn't have the stove.
Feels like a loophole to me.
No, you could use a microwave. I mean, I think it's, it's back to those days where, people, didn't have the technology of what we've got now.
Yeah, but one thing is that
cooker or all that sort of stuff. But
if you said that it was repurposed for, let's say, a family room, you could very well have a refrigerator and a countertop with a sink in a family room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to require the whole kitchen to be ripped out is a pretty costly thing. So somebody could use it,
Yeah,
use the cabinets and the refrigerator and whatever.
Yeah, even in the city of Boston and all that. I mean, I think it's a state building code. Is if you cap the pipe for the gas pipe for the stove, that means it's not occupied as a dwelling unit. It's a carryover from the olden days.
So we've got that. We've got the can't use it as a short-term rental. This F has new stuff in it. I feel like we're okay with it.
Do we need something there though that would allow for this employee or caretaker?
This says a relationship. It doesn't say family relationship. They still have to say they're an employee.
Okay.
And you have to go back down, Tim. You have to change that number 4. Shouldn't it be number 3 on G?
Yeah, so we eliminated 3.
Yep.
Should the 5 be 4?
5. Yes.
I'm being fresh.
10 o'clock, you can be as
If we're
fresh as
paying
you
attention. We talked about A, B, and C here in 8. That was a discussion. 7, 8, 9, 10. Good.
I'm just going to take number 8 out entirely because we already crossed it out.
So and then there's a new 8. And then we just need language for not the not the zoning here, but for the warrant article to
Right.
strike the two existing
Yeah, so
provisions.
the section for the ADU is section 3, subsection A, paragraph 9, I believe. When I looked that up before, when I put that in my email. And Joe said that the ADU accessory use portion rather is section 3B1F.
Yeah,
And I trusted that he got that right.
I did. I looked it up. I just
Okay.
had it.
So I guess the question now is, are we prepared to vote to send this to the select board? Recognizing, of course, we've had this draft in our inbox for a while, but this is our first discussion on it. We would still need to have a public hearing and potentially make changes or withdraw it, but this would give us the opportunity to pursue it at the February town meeting.
I think that given that it's a cleanup of the existing, that we're not expanding it, that it is something that's Joe Prondak has reviewed and given us comment on. I'm fine with sending this forward now and getting feedback, appropriate feedback, any further feedback from the Board of Appeal if you get it. Kathleen?
Yes. So I make a motion to send the special permit draft accessory dwelling unit article to the Board of Selectmen and to the Chair of the Zoning Board of Appeal for comment.
So we have some discussion.
Yeah, I was just going to say, did I second the motion?
Well, can I just ask for if there would be a friendly amendment to strike the two sections that we referred to earlier? And then replace the one section with this language? I can read the section
Friendly amendment to the
numbers
motion?
again.
Yeah. To strike the existing temporary apartment.
Right, so section 3, subsection A, paragraph 9.
Yeah.
And then the striking of the portion of the accessory use, section 3, subsection B, paragraph 1F.
Yeah. I'm okay with that.
I'll second.
Okay, then discussion. Go ahead, Denny.
So I'm preparing myself to go forward with this, but I just wanted to note that we are kind of rushing this. And if during the public process, if people come in and it seems like there's a lot of surgery needed and so forth, I may feel differently, mainly because I was so focused on getting the condo bylaw ready that I spent 3 days on that, and I did not have time to study this, and I've never had one come before me. So I am sort of going on your words and your expertise, Cheryl, April, and Kathleen. But I did want to be prepared if if people show up and the room is on fire and people there's a lot of changes or room for improvement, then I may feel differently. But as it looks, based on everything you're telling me, I'm prepared to go forward with that understanding.
I have discussed it with the affordable housing committee, the housing committee, Melinda Collins and Julie Kramer and those folks. So they saw an earlier draft. And we did have a discussion over the summer on the problems with the temporary apartment situation. So,
do any of these get counted as affordables?
Well, that's a whole separate issue.
It can.
They can't because they're not put on. They don't comply with fair housing. You have to be your relative of somebody.
So you're
So,
limiting the public. Okay, that's fine. Let's not muck it up. That's fine.
I mean, I did in Carlisle, 1,000 years ago, we did an accessory dwelling affordable program with our CPA money in Carlisle, and we did it in Situate. So that has been done in other towns. We now have community preservation funding here in this town, thankfully. So that could be something we could do further on. But I have to say that it wasn't used very frequently, Denny. Because of the fact that people really, if you're an accessory unit, you really wanted to have somebody that you knew, not somebody that you picked off the housing lottery list. So, it wasn't very popular, I have to say.
But it can address the lowercase a affordable,
It
where,
definitely,
I mean,
well, it does a couple of things. It makes sure that those units are safe because they have to be inspected. Now people are doing them illegally. They don't have the exits they need. They don't have the fire and smoke detectors, carbon monoxide things, all that sort of stuff, because they're being done under the radar. This way we can help that situation.
The housing costs in, Milton have gone higher and higher. And what I've seen is some people maybe their largest asset is their house, and they still need to live in their house. But they don't need the amount of house that they have. And if they were to sell the house, where would they go, right? What's their option of a place that's affordable to them? So one option that they have, and especially if they are grandparents and want to help with their grandkids, is to look at having the children, having an opportunity on the same property. And it is something that's popular. It is something that people are interested in. And, that's what I mean right now. I mean, so I think it does, it may be that making it less onerous process will open it up for more people who have that interest, but it doesn't take it beyond that to strangers.
The other thing is that I know, well, this may not be conventional thinking, an au pair can often be a much more economical childcare solution than a childcare center or other full-time nanny situations where they're not living. So a lot of people that I know do that and need a place for their au pair, and it really is an economic issue for families. So,
and I will say on the elder care side, it's I've seen people too who an elder wants a little bit of independence still, but yet needs some care. So having their own place that they can still go into on the property gives them a little sense of independence still as they're aging into something more requiring assistance.
Okay, I think we should, I'm sorry, Rich, I don't mean to. You have any comment that you'd like to add? I don't see your face, so I'm sorry that I.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. And please, if you're trying to speak, Rich, and I don't see you, just yell. I think that's kind of the format. Okay, so then I guess we would take a vote by roll call. Kathleen O'Donnell?
Yes.
Rich Beeler?
Yes.
Denny Swenson?
Yes.
Tagayas?
Yes.
April Anderson, yes. Okay, we'll move that on to the the Select Board, and then we'll schedule that for a public hearing. So we have another item that we absolutely have to finish tonight, and that's the budget. Tim sent the budget documents in the hard drive, in the office drive here. I think you did a good job of preparing us. Tim, I don't know what more you'd like to say about these things.
It is what it is.
I just would like to say that the Master Plan Implementation Committee met last week and did vote to request the $30,000 that Tim has included in the budget. And as we all may recall, the Planning Board and the Select Board need to approve that request.
And then the Planning Department's budget request is?
The departmental budget is actually just my salary that's under the front office. So planning board is Julia's salary, stamps, pens, studies.
And the total is $90,268 for fiscal year 2022. So what do you need from us? A vote? Oh, go ahead, Denny. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I thought we might be able to talk about the items in the budget. I know that we had talked, I'm sorry, I might have missed some documents, but I did read some documents earlier. I wanted to suggest that we include a land count and refrain from doing traffic studies until after the pandemic. And I wanted to support Tim Cherwinski on his town land studies to assess if there is any, possible pocket that could help us make, strides with addressing affordable housing. And I think that goes hand in hand with the land count. And, Kathleen had mentioned a while ago that it might be hard right now at this moment to get us through with a land count. But having that information ready at our fingertips could help us steer projects if that changes, because there are cases, happening all the time, and that could change.
What you mean? Oh, do you
So-
mean? when
so
you
can I-
land
can I
count,
just-
you mean-
Yeah.
I
Can I
just
just,
I'm trying to understand what the land count was. You're talking about counting the area that we have
Affordable.
devoted to affordable housing?
Yeah, the
Oh.
affordable land count, land
Okay.
count.
so
I
Denny,
I didn't know what you meant by land count.
let me just say here that the appropriation under, I believe, I forget what the line item is, whether it's studies or miscellaneous or whatever. The sort of the bulk of the I think it's $50,000. The bulk of the non-salary portion of the budget, that appropriation gives the planning board pretty decent discretion to decide how they want to sort of spend it. So we don't have to talk about, map out, this is the study we're going to do, and we're going to spend this much on this right now. That's money that, I think town meeting kind of understands that. And that's the reason why the part of the budget narrative is, in the past, this is how the planning board has spent this money. East Milton Community Visioning, Milton Village, stuff, all the different things that the planning board and MPIC have spent their money on. That's kind of how, so we've got a whole fiscal year to figure out how to spend that money, to have that discussion. So not to sort of nip that in the bud, but just, you don't have to feel the need to sort of get that in right now. We just need to say, give me the ability to send the MPIC budget on to the select board for their sign off, and then the planning board budget to the town accountant, and then wherever that goes.
I'd just like to say I'm pleased that it was requested to stay level from 50 and 30, because I, in the past, have, in response to these budget requests when I was chair, I continued to advocate for our budget, saying that the planning work was, money well spent, because it could lead to, vast improvements. It could lead to economic development opportunities, increased tax revenue, et cetera. So I'm happy to hear that the request to come back to us was to stay level funded in this fiscal environment.
Me too.
Yes, me too. And I also want to plug the open space plan that you're moving forward with. I think that's an important thing. So add it to the list of things we'll discuss at a later date. Do you need a roll call vote from us for this? Or do you just need
A vote would be great, just to sort of approve the fiscal 22 budget, so we can kind of move on to the warrant process.
Okay,
So moved.
is there any more comments before we move to the vote? And if not, then we should probably make a motion to approve both the fiscal year 22 proposed planning board budget, as well as the fiscal year 22 master plan implementation committee budget, both level funded. Denny,
So moved. Oh, Denny moved
So
it
moved,
already,
yeah.
sorry. I'll second it.
Okay. Discussion? No, then we'll do a roll call. Cheryl Tagayas,
Yes.
Denny Swenson,
Yes.
Rich Beeler,
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell,
Yes.
Bill Anderson, yes. Thank you, Tim. I know the budget was kind of tricky, the budgeting process. we do have one more thing on our agenda, which is the housing production plan, which we never have time to get to. However, we do, because the items in the housing production plan that were recommended to us under zoning strategies were adopt additional zoning for mixed use development, which we did at the last town meeting for Milton Village overlay, amend the accessory apartment bylaw, which we're proposing to do moving forward, amend the condo conversion bylaw, which we're also proposing to do in February. There's two other items under there: explore inclusionary zoning and streamline permitting for affordable housing. So I would say, even though we have not had an express discussion about this plan, we've done a darn good job of moving it forward without talking about it.
I would add the East Milton work, because I think we are trying to see whether we can get potentially to a 40R district there. And that planning work, I think, is also tied into that housing production plan.
Yes.
So can I chime in with three really quick things?
Yes.
I think per Allison's comment earlier about working with the select board's housing subcommittee on a kind of public presentation education campaign about the housing production plan, I think that's great. And I appreciate her taking the lead on that. And I think that can probably suffice for, additional discussion on the housing production plan, because I think, April, you did hit it on the nose. The planning board has really taken this issue by the reins. And I think that's really great. The two other items, one, explore inclusionary zoning. I've had this discussion with folks, and we don't have to get into it too much, but the way that we have done inclusionary zoning in the past and the way that we continue to do it, I think, is the same. It's the sort of underlying zoning conversation that has changed. I think, if you look at Hendry's, if you look at 2 Adam Street, if you look at all the other special permits and PUDs, they all have some inclusionary component. Those are the few instances where we've actually approved multifamily zoning, where inclusionary zoning actually works. So it makes sense that it's been included in those and not sort of some overarching. Basically, it's tough to do inclusionary zoning when you don't have by right multifamily zoning. So when we talk about Milton Village, which is a good example of a sort of, it's a special permit process, but it's district wide and it has district wide inclusionary requirements. Whether East Milton is a 40R or something else, that's the direction we'll go in. So I think continuing to have that conversation about what are the right levels, what is a policy that the planning board could potentially think about, I think is a worthwhile discussion to continue. But putting an inclusionary requirement into the zoning code without also pairing that with a town-wide multifamily, entitlement is kind of, I don't know exactly how that would work. And then really quickly on the second one or the third one or whatever number we're on, about streamlining the permitting process for affordable housing. There's a lot of ways in which Milton is not really in the league of the Cambridges and the Somervilles of the world. But Cambridge did recently pass an affordable housing overlay for their entire city. Somerville is on the fast track to do the same. And that basically, says in any zoning district, if you're, proposing, I forget what the percentages are, but a very high level of affordability, you get a sort of a by right entitlement for X number of density. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's something that has really gained a lot of steam. So this concept is out there and it's being implemented, maybe not in peer municipalities, but I think it's a model we can at least start to look at and say, like, okay, I think condo conversion is going to be a very illuminating conversation at town meeting. I think the next step is, based on how that conversation goes, what's the appetite, what's the desire to do something, kind of akin to what the housing production plan is talking about. So there's models out there. I think it's a 5-year plan, and I think we've really aggressively started working on it. So I think those are things that we can all kind of start to look at.
Tim, is
I've drafted, sorry, go ahead.
Is our plan certified by DHCD?
Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
So if
I've
we-
drafted inclusionary zoning bylaws in other towns, and the problem is that it's really designed for towns that are doing the subdivisions. You know, you're doing a 20 lot subdivision or a 30 lot subdivision, and you know, we don't really have that working
Right.
here. And the pricing is always tough. You know, how are you gonna let people buy out of it and all that sort of stuff? So it's just, I think it's not going to be a particularly helpful situation for us.
I think we found it difficult when we were thinking about like at Pulte, you know, you get what's an affordable lot and what is that getting you, right? So, I mean, having
With
those,
Marine Estates.
right,
Yeah,
that's a contribution,
Yeah, but we talked about it
50%.
at first as being an affordable lot.
right?
Is there, remember, they wanted to give us $5,000 as a contribution.
My understanding is, by the way, didn't that money get paid recently, Tim?
Yay, good. But yeah,
Not 5,000 though either.
no, 50. We did a much greater job. But I'm sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you. Were you done, Cheryl?
Oh, yes, I am, sorry.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I like the idea, Tim, of the expedited path for a higher level in exchange for a higher level of affordability, only in existing structures. But I think that's interesting.
Okay. Let's think about it.
Not at 10:23. Have an expedited meeting. Is there anything else anybody would like to chat about before we adjourn?
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank you.
I just want to
Thanksgiving.
mention before the nice happy Thanksgivings is Tamposi's buying more property.
What? That's not happy.
No, actually they've got 582 Canton Ave under agreement, which is behind 648 Canton Ave.
So this is kind of my point. Like if we think 40B discussion is over, we're kidding ourselves. We're kidding ourselves. So we need to be aggressive, and it's going to push people out of their comfort zone, and we're going to have to do things differently. I mean, we can either do that or roll the dice, and every neighborhood is as vulnerable as the next. So with that, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.
I move to adjourn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second
Oh yeah, right.
Second.
session. Hear none. Kathleen
No,
O'Donnell.
no, all in favor. Yeah.
Denny Swenson.
Good night.
Cheryl Tagayas.
Yes.
Rich Peeler.
Yes.
April Anderson, yes. And I counted you as a yes, Kathleen, although I was taking your vote.
Happy
night,
Be safe,
everybody.
everyone.
Good night.
Be
Good night.
safe. Good night.